We usually start with citizens' comment on agenda items, and I think we have a pretty good lineup of that. Karen Starr on Eaton Street. Please come forward and speak to the council. You're here to listen, okay. Julian Kasparek, are you here to listen? I don't see him.
Listen.
You're listen, okay. That was Julian, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then we have Loretta Campbell. Loretta? Are you gonna speak, or?
Just listen to?
These are, okay. This is a listen-in sheet now. We're going through these pretty quick, aren't we? Christy Altman. Christy's going to speak. Please come to the microphone if you're going to speak. Oh, Dina.
Christy, Christi, Altman, Aultman. Hello, council members and mayor. My name is Christy Altman. I live at 3085 Eaton Street. I've wanted to come speak with you on the matter of the residential development standards in District 1 in the neighborhood in which I live. To be truthful, I've avoided coming down here for a while. I don't know if you've ever felt about something so personally, grievously, that you doubted your own ability to speak about it with equanimity and tact. And if you ever have, then you understand why maybe I've avoided coming down here and speaking with you. That being said, I've been a resident of the Northwest Denver area, Denver and Wheat Ridge, for the past 23 years. And like you, you've seen a time of tremendous transformation in many of these older neighborhoods. Naively, I felt that maybe my little neighborhood in Wheat Ridge was immune to this. I can't even begin to tell you how demoralizing it was for me to come home one day last spring to find a 3-story particle board tower standing immediately behind my little house, occupying the space where I once saw trees and the sky and the horizon, the sunset, and even a little bit of the mountains, if I went like this. I know my neighbors have come down here for the past several weeks and stood before you to speak about the impact that this development has had on them, and I could absolutely echo all of their concerns. However, I'd like to speak to you from a different perspective, and that's one of permanence. You see, the construction noise, the debris, the music, the weekly porta potty suctioning, vacuuming that's occurring in the alley behind my house every week, all of that's going to go away. But this structure, however, is an unfortunate and permanent fact of our landscape. I don't blame or find fault with the city council for this. I fault a lot of things. For one, shameless and unaccountable developers. They aren't all that way, but clearly these are. I blame certain modern home buyers who seem profoundly indifferent or even willfully ignorant of the impact their building choices have on those around them. And I blame the precedent that has been set, maybe in that town to the east, for their failure to protect their neighborhood architectural heritage. Change and growth are a part of life, and I understand that. But history and preservation matter as well. I understand, as a council, you may be loath to implement any action that conveys the impression that Wheat Ridge is anti-development or opposed to renewal, in a sense. However, we're talking about an established neighborhood that we think is pretty amazing the way it is. We're asking you to consider a temporary moratorium so that we can establish a permanent compromise in the development and building standards that are responsible and respectful of the history of this neighborhood and its residents, past, present, and future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Christy. I don't know if you heard of it. Christy lives at 3085 Eaton Street. Now we'd like Dina Svetlik. Dina, are you with us? Good.
Good evening, Dina Svetlik, Swetlik, at 3715 Newland Street in District 1. Hi, members of council. Here to talk on two different things this evening. First, I want to thank you for finally acting on a snow removal ordinance. I think it's so important to have this in the community. Particularly, I was a little taken aback to read in the memo that only Wheat Ridge and Centennial are the only two communities in the Front Range area that don't have something like this to date. But a couple of comments. I would make sure that it's explicit in the ordinance, that it's also for sidewalks on private property. And what I mean by that is adjacent or within private streets that are being constructed, a la 38th and Wadsworth, that those streets may not get dedicated to the city, but they should also comply with the snow removal ordinance. I would also make sure that it's clear that the ticker starts when the snow stops. I think that might have been a little vague in the ordinance. And then, starting off with the 24 hours for both residential and commercial is sort of a one-size-fits-all. It's a good start, but hopefully either through discussions for this final ordinance or in the future, some calibration can take place such that pedestrian priority streets, such as commercial areas and Main Street, actually have a shorter time frame to remove the snow, and then conversely, residential may be a little bit longer because we do have a higher percentage of elderly population, and for the disabled, that may need a little bit more time to find removal services. And secondly, I wanted to speak on the potential moratorium for the R1C zone district. And these comments are sort of all over the place. First, I would say to make sure in any discussions and obviously ordinance language that it's clear when you're talking about a principal structure versus an accessory structure, that's very clear, that people understand what the differences are in terms of the setbacks. And again, I think it's really important to make sure that through this study that any regulations are calibrated to the different lot typologies that exist in R1C, right? There's a lot of different neighborhood typologies within the entire city, but just within R1C, you have alley-loaded lots and front-loaded lots and of different sizes. So make sure that that's taken into consideration in any bulk plan or anything moving forward. Specifically on the moratorium, if a moratorium is put in place, and I think the memo did reference something to this effect, but I would say that it should be focused perhaps on just new construction or additions or changes over, say, 50% of the structure, so that you are not dinging folks that are living here and maybe wanting to do improvements on their homes, so that it's not just a black or white moratorium. And again, I think the memo did reference something to that effect. And I would be very careful about any considerations on height changes. You can create a very beautiful 2.5-story front gabled home or cross gabled home. And so doing some sort of blanket discussion on we need to reduce height, I don't think is the answer. And also I would be very careful about the step back, any step backs for a second story. I think we all recognize the Frankenstein homes that already exist within Wheat Ridge in terms of some not so great additions that may have been done, and be very careful about any step backs to make sure that a house can still be designed within that building envelope, and that you're also maximizing having an architecturally great place. And I live in R1C, so this directly affects me. Thank you.
Thank you. Al Lizalde on Trace Street. Al? Al is going to pass. Thank you. Melissa Archuleta?
Hello, I'm Melissa Archuleta. I live at 2906 Depew Street. I have been here to speak before, and I'm here along with many of my neighbors and as a representative to the neighbors who can't be here today to voice our concerns about the 3-story houses being built in R1C. I'm really hopeful that the city council will take into consideration the temporary moratorium until an official hearing can be heard about the zoning and height laws in R1C. From a personal point of view, I think not reviewing those current zoning laws or considering current residential development and architectural standards when handing out building permits is allowing developers to come in and overhaul R1C without the input from the community that actually lives there, and from the city council for that matter. My neighbors and I are concerned about a lot of things. We're concerned about property values, especially to the houses that are neighbors to these huge 3-story houses, and they're single-story bungalows or 2 stories with a basement. We're concerned about the affordability of the city. Part of the desire to move into Reach Ridge is because Northwest Denver has become unaffordable to most working class people. And we're also concerned that the revitalization project is not being done with the good intentions and with respect to the community that's already here. So I do want to thank District 1 Councilwoman Duran, who has taken the time to meet with us and help push this agenda forward, and I really hope that a compromise can be made for both new developments in our community, because I think there's room for that, and also to the people that are here in the old developments as well.
Thank you. Eric Jacobson.
Eric Jacobson. I live at 2929 Chase. Good evening, City Council members. I'd like to thank you for your ongoing consideration of residential development standards. I live in an R1C zone, 2 houses up from a new 3-story build. And I've lived here for 10 years with my wife, Katie, who has spoken at several recent City Council meetings related to this. We appreciate council members and staff's consideration of bulk planning requirements, rear yard setbacks, and ideally height limits.
Yep.
I'm also here tonight to express my support for a temporary moratorium on building permits for new structures, in additions to existing structures which are greater than 2 stories or taller than 27 feet in R1C and R3 zoned properties. Until now, we've enjoyed a private backyard for 10 years. We do appreciate many changes here, including improvements and growth. We also love the character of our community dearly. We're desperate for reasonable and responsible development that balances growth while respecting the citizens who have made and continue to make our neighborhood great. Thank you for your consideration of this request and ongoing consideration of fair residential development standards.
Thank you, Eric. Kim Calamino.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Kim Calamino, C-A-L-O-M-I-N-O, 4070 Dover Street. I have 2 topics, the NRS and the moratorium. First, the NRS. The NRS, Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy, has been a foundational document that has informed the progress of the city. And I want to thank past councils and this council, past councils for adopting, and this council and prior councils for seeing that through and staying the course. It has had a positive impact on the city, and I encourage you to continue in that direction. I want in particular to thank Local Works for the great work that they have done across all 3 of the central recommendations contained in the NRS. And I want to thank staff who have provided the continuity and the expertise that's been the glue to seeing this through over these many years since 2005. I encourage you to stay the course and continue our forward movement. Regarding the consideration of the moratorium, I can only encourage you to proceed with caution and with an eye to the property rights of all. I echo Dino's comments. Moratoriums do have an impact both in short term and long term on how we manage change and how we manage neighborhood conversations and how we do or don't attract investors who help reinvent, diversify, and renovate our aging housing stock, which is one of the key elements contained in the NRS. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kim. And I had one more person who had signaled that she wanted to, I see her. Yes, would you please come forward? Give us your name and address.
My name is Victoria Mendoza, and I live in 3021 Chase Street. And I'm here to express my comments about the residential zoning. The current growth of Denver has made a very public a fact that we know, love, and cherish, that we have a beautiful neighborhood, a great and a strong community, and a good government. Many people want to come and enjoy those aspects and make this area their home. We need to be very precise about how those new homes can be built. There is a vision for smart growth, but we need to carefully regulate how that growth will visually look. We need to revise the regulations regarding height, bulk plane, transitional height, and all the factors that will determine that our neighborhood grows without being visually tattered forever, without creating animosities that seriously compromise the community fabric that has taken so many years to be woven. Respected members of the council, I ask you to put a moratorium on building permits, residential building permits, to have the time to review and change the zoning codes in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. That's all we have on citizens wishing to speak. It's been suggested that since we have so many folks here on that very subject, that we move item number 4 up to the top. Is that meaning that would be the first one we discuss, which is the residential development standards? Can I get a consensus on doing that, on changing our agenda? I've got enough? Okay, good. Then let's go ahead and do that, and we'll start with item 4.
Thank you, Mayor. We did receive a request from Councilwoman Duran and Councilmember Matthews to add this item to the agenda. So we did ask staff, I asked staff to put together a little bit of background information and maybe some recommendations on if you chose to move forward with a moratorium, on maybe how it could be structured. So Ken will be here to answer any questions that you may have on that. So otherwise, I think we'll open up to council discussion.
I know that's kind of a switch up for you. Do you,
Are we going to discuss all of the issues? I mean, are we going to be going back through, setbacks and heights and discuss the whole plethora of issues, or just the moratorium right now?
I think the item was specifically addressed on the moratorium on demo permits and building permits in the R1C zone districts. So I think, yeah, that's the topic.
and I believe there was sort of a recommendation as to how to go through this that would not be detrimental to us. And I remember reading it in here.
Page 70 of 78.
Oh, you're on there.
Yeah.
Page 2, that's what I
Yes.
need to hear. There we go.
Kirsty?
So I guess I just have a question on a timeline, because I know we met, we talked about some of the bulk plane ideas and kind of what other cities were doing, and that we were going to go back and kind of look at them and come up with an idea of what your recommendation was. I know we had a little bit of one, but I guess I'm just curious as far as a timeline on when we would think that would be presented to council. I mean, I guess, it's one thing to do a moratorium because we know that it's not going to be coming for a year, but is it something that's closer in progress and close to be presented is one of my questions.
We've been continuing to work at on a staff level. To some of the speakers' comments, we want to, be careful in kind of putting this discussion in the context of both the typical lot sizes in R1C zoning and in East Wheat Ridge, and kind of seeing how it works relative to existing setback requirements as well. So we've been doing some design studies for a variety of different kind of building types, thinking about construction dimensions, and just kind of the practical implications of that. So we've been doing some design studies. And we're making good progress, we think, good enough progress that we think we can, draft that regulatory framework here fairly shortly, then get that off to the city attorney for review to get it in ordinance form. So we've suggested on the second page of the memo, right in the middle, that we could get to a planning commission hearing on September 15th, and followed by a city council first reading on September 26th, and then a city council public hearing on October 10th. So really a little less than 2 months.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. No, that's fine. And if, there are options for expediting that, I mean, it is possible to adopt ordinances by emergency on first reading if that's a desire. Not something that's done often, but certainly can be appropriate.
And then one other just quick question. Do you have any requests in the works right now? Because I know a lot of times we've done that before where people have worked with the planning department and set, they have all the drafts and everything ready to go, and then, we put a moratorium on it. Is there,
You made a request for a building.
are there
permit.
requests in for permits and that type of thing?
I don't believe we
now?
have any permits that are pending for something that would, kind of push the envelope towards the maximum capacity that's allowed in that 35-foot height timeframe. I know there's some vacant lots. I know we certainly are talking with people about future development proposals. So I wouldn't be shocked if one were submitted soon. We also have some multifamily proposals that are going through the approval process in the R3 zone district, which is why we included a little bit of a discussion of that at the tail end of the memo as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Matthews.
Especially for the folks that are here in the audience, but when Councilwoman Duran suggested this moratorium and approached me with it, our whole intent was that we would not have to proceed with haste and regret at leisure, and that there are so many facets to what's going on here. I mean, like you mentioned, in R3 zoning, is there something applicable out there? And all 4 districts are different, and so it was an attempt to just put a temporary halt to development of this type until such time as planning and staff would be able to do a comprehensive study of all 4 districts, and not just R1C, but a comprehensive planning and look at for all of the different residential zone types, so that we could do this one time and get it right. So there, that was our concern, is that things could be handled appropriately. And there's a lot of urgency for a lot of the homeowners that are being affected by this, and that's why we thought a moratorium would give everyone a chance to shake things out better without making any false steps. I mean, it may halt a construction somewhere for a month, but if we do something that we have to come back and revisit, then we just confuse the issue a whole lot.
So you're looking for a reasonable approach.
Yeah.
If I could just comment on that, because I certainly acknowledge and appreciate those comments. We, in this short-term time frame, we really are focused on, handling what we think is a perceived issue mostly in East Wheat Ridge. So we hadn't anticipated in that time frame that more comprehensive look at the issue throughout the city. It really is mostly focused on development typologies for lots and structures in East Wheat Ridge and in R1C. We're certainly glad to continue the conversation more broadly citywide, but as you point out, I mean, the contexts vary a lot as you get further west into neighborhoods that just look very different than East Wheat Ridge do.
Mr. Fitzgerald.
I agree that we should act quickly, but I just want to point out that it seems to me there are some conflicts with the neighborhood revitalization strategy inherent in this issue, and we should make sure that we somehow find the sweet spot where we don't conflict with the neighborhood revitalization plans, the strategy there, because I do see some impediments, shall we say, to redevelopment that are potentials in whatever we come up with in this case. So I agree with the idea that we have to focus on the R1C and the east side right now, but let's sort of be cognizant of the revitalization strategy and the potential conflicts.
Mr. Urban.
I think impediments to development for the betterment of the neighborhood is that balance that we're trying to figure out, is that we're looking for some way to make sure that these developments aren't being done to the detriment of the neighborhood, and that's the balance that we're trying to determine as we look at these moratoriums. I think that a more specialized and nuanced moratorium in a specific zone district would be more appropriate than a citywide moratorium in all zone districts. As much as a comprehensive review might be appropriate, I think this is something that has been sort of identified in this particular zone district at this given time, and we might be able to make applications of what we've learned in this process in other zone districts. But as it relates to this, I don't think it would be appropriate to say across all zone districts that we're now going to place a moratorium on building permits. That would be, I think, deleterious. I can't imagine we could do that and figure out a way to keep things rolling. So I think the R13 or R1C would be the appropriate place to start with the moratorium and work with that and leave the R3 out of it.
Mr. N.
First, I'd like to thank staff for getting this on the agenda tonight. I really appreciate it. And so if I just kind of want to repeat a few things. So this will come to Planning Commission on September 15th, correct? And then
Assuming we can
for hearing.
get comments from the city attorney. We haven't really sat down with him yet, but yes.
This is a tentative timeframe.
Yep.
And then city council first reading would be September 26th. And then city council hearing would be on October 10th.
Correct.
Correct? Okay. So if a temporary moratorium went into place, it would be for basically the east part of District 1, the R1C, correct? Where our bungalow areas are.
I think we've suggested that it be for R1C. We provided a couple maps, and the maps do include some properties that would be in western Wheat Ridge as well, notably in the Clear Barrel neighborhood, north of Clear Creek, between Kipling and Wadsworth. That's mostly ranch home construction in that area right now, single family and duplexes. It's certainly possible in drafting a moratorium ordinance to consider geographic boundaries in addition to zoning district boundaries. So you could certainly craft an ordinance that said R1C zone properties between Wadsworth and Sheridan, if that's your desire.
No, I think the way you have it here is fine. I'd like to read the last paragraph here that says, staff suggests consideration of modified language that would propose a temporary moratorium on building permits for new structures and additions to existing structures which are greater than 2 stories or taller than 27 feet. And that would take place, when would that begin? I mean, if we get a consensus tonight for this,
Right.
then it has to come back to council, correct?
Patrick, is it possible to get that on next Monday's agenda for the first?
Yes, we
First reading.
could. We could do it on first reading on August 22nd. Second reading would be, if you do a first and second reading, you could certainly do an emergency moratorium. So it would be effective August 22nd on Monday. But if you go through the typical ordinance form, there's 2 readings. The second reading would be on September 12th.
So we could do an emergency on the 22nd.
Correct.
Okay, so we could get that implemented. And in between then and September 15th, would we be doing any more community outreach discussions with,
That'd be planning.
with the neighbors, in the RC1 that this affects?
We hadn't really contemplated that, just in the interest of time. We noted that the last time we discussed this, and I think July 18th, that we could We certainly invited the public to participate in those 2 public hearings that would be required for the consideration of the ordinance. So the Planning Commission public hearing on September 15th and the City Council first reading on September 26th. Or excuse me, City Council public hearing on October 10th or September 26th, depending on whether it's an emergency or not.
Okay, I mean, I understand all 4 districts are different. I mean, you can't lump them all together. They're all unique, and that's not something that, you know, we're trying to do. We realize, and I understand that the needs for District 2, 3, and 4 are all different. I would just really like to get a consensus for a temporary moratorium, as you stated here, and also a consensus. Is it 2 separate consensus as far as putting this on August 22nd and doing an emergency?
You can do it the same, just,
Same.
yeah, ask for, to put it on Monday for emergency ordinance moratorium.
All right, can I go ahead and do that now?
Well, I think we need also a time limit on the moratorium,
Time frame, yeah.
timeframes, meaning 60
30 days,
days,
60
30
days, and
whatever.
How long does staff need?
based on, yeah, we should ask Ken.
You need,
If it went
discussion with the
if it went
attorney
in
as well.
place on August 22nd, if you did an emergency ordinance for a moratorium on the 22nd, based on Ken's schedule, we're still saying through October 10th.
Let's say 3 months, because that would give them a little bit more time.
So that's 90 days.
And keeping in mind that typically when we, draft those temporary moratoriums, that the ordinance adopting the new regulations, of course, repeals the moratorium instantly. So if we get it done as on the schedule proposed, the moratorium would lapse as part of that ordinance as well.
Mr. Matthews is very anxious to join in here.
Yeah, along those lines, I was going to suggest that we seek consensus and a timeline on the moratorium to end when the ordinance is actually passed. And then if if, the dam breaks, staff needs more time, something happens, it's not locked in to 30, 60 days or what have you. It's when it would be rescinded as soon as the ordinance is passed. That would be the cutoff time.
Wasn't that what you've?
It's a little different. I think Mr. Matthews is saying just don't put any time frame to it. Just acknowledge that upon the adoption of new ordinance adopting bulk plain requirements, that the temporary moratorium shall lapse. What I was suggesting is it's our typical practice that when we adopt the ordinance that addresses the issue that was at hand for the temporary moratorium, that we would typically have a section in that ordinance that also rescinds the moratorium. So either approach probably works.
I would just like to make sure that however we do this, that it somehow coincides so that we're able to finish it up before the beginning of the first of the year, so that as people are looking at next year, that they can plan for whatever projects they're looking at doing, knowing that this has been settled out and that they can sort of plan for next year.
Councilmember Hoppe.
One thing that I would like everybody to keep in mind is that there's a lot of work that goes into it before they go in and request a building permit. So people are working with their bankers, they're working with their real estate agents, they're already working with their contractor, the contractor is already working with the subcontractor, and you can have subcontractors all the way down to the plumber who could be negatively affected by just throwing a moratorium on them until, random 3 months or whatever. I mean, that's, all the way down to the plumber, they're counting on that money for their family. And so it's not just that you buy a property and slap together some, ink together some designs and then bring it down to the city to get plans and to get a permit. There's a lot of work that goes in the front end and a lot of money that's spent in the front end. And I think that I personally feel like putting out a moratorium and saying, not until like October or November that we'll have something is detrimental to some of these private property owners. And while Ken said that they don't necessarily have anything right now that's doing the 35 feet kind of structure that people are talking about, I would suggest that maybe we're talking about doing an emergency ordinance, that maybe we do an emergency ordinance that sets the bulk planes tonight. And then if somebody's already in the works with their architect, then they can go in and get adjustments. And then we go through all of the work on the schedule that we're looking at. And if we need to then make adjustments to it, then we can make the adjustments to it at a later date. And we do
Talking about
something like,
time adjustments, date adjustments?
talking about code adjustments.
Okay, gotcha.
So, so one of my suggestions would be that we do an emergency ordinance that maintains the current setbacks, but has a bulk plane of a 45-degree angle starts at 15 feet, and then you start your bulk plane. That's going to get you about a 2.5 pitched roof structure in there. And then at that point, we can, if we need to change it to 10 feet or 12 feet later on down the road, then we're able to change it to the 10 or 12 feet. And that way, the people that are already in the process and have already been spent, it takes months to get to the point where you turn in your permit, where you turn in for your permits. And the people that are already in that process then won't be negatively affected. And that's my suggestion.
Mr. Fitzgerald?
I like that. I think it's a good idea. Is just, Patrick, based on your experience, is there any legal exposure if we would create a temporary bulk plane ordinance and that's, say, is more restrictive than the one we eventually do? Could we, is there any legal exposure that you, I know you're not the lawyer here, but.
No, I don't believe so. I mean, we're a home rule city. Council has the ability to change their code as they like. And so I don't think there's any legal liability issues. I'm not sure what Mr. Dahl would say about an emergency ordinance to do it. He always counsels city council that, make sure it's a true emergency before you're doing that. But I think you have the right to do an emergency ordinance if you want. I think staff would be a little cautious about putting an ordinance in place without full due diligence on what exactly the height and setback should be. And maybe Ken can speak to that. But we've done quite a bit of research and heard from a lot of the citizens, and I think we have a pretty good idea of where what recommendations we want to make. But I don't know if it's just as easy as putting a number in an ordinance. But Ken, you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, Ms. Hoppy's recommendation of a 45-degree bulk plane measured beginning at a height of 15 feet along the property line is, I think consistent with probably what our research is telling us. We've really been focused on doing some building typology studies on what is a very typical lot in the R1C zone district, and that's a lot that's 50 feet wide and 125 feet in width. And essentially what that is it's two lots that were platted back in the early 1900s combined together and often held in one ownership. So that's a very typical lot dimension. And what that achieves then, if you go with those types of numbers, is it probably doesn't have much impact at all, if any, on two-story construction. On three-story construction, it does have an impact on those lots, that it would make it hard to do a full three-story on those typical lots, unless you pushed in from the minimum setback. So if you came into, I don't know what the number is, so please don't quote me, but if you came into 8 feet on both side property lines, you might be able to go straight up with a three-story construction. Again, don't quote me on that, but that's kind of the impacts of the numbers that Ms. Hoppy was suggesting.
Wait. Sir, I thank you. I appreciate your question, but this is really a study examination session, and we do public input. We put that in, last 6 months, a year ago, but we do just mostly work here at this point. But I appreciate your trying to ask questions. Okay, we've got another suggestion on the floor here, and I believe Ms. Duran had her hand up first.
What I'd like to say is I can't or I won't support Councilor Hoppy's suggestion on doing an emergency ordinance. I mean, what we're asking for is 3 months or sooner, it could happen, a temporary moratorium to actually work with our citizens, our community, and as a council to come to a decision, a permanent decision that's going to affect the rest of the community permanently. So I think trying to rush into an ordinance tonight on bulk plane and say, okay, we're going to do an emergency ordinance and then we'll make adjustments as needed, it's backwards. we need to do this now, do a temporary moratorium, listen to what our citizens have to say, what they're asking. They're not asking for anything outrageous or out of this world, and I don't know why we have to rush to get this done this evening and not work through the process. So it's not something that I would, I mean, as sensitive as I am to the bankers, the contractors, the plumbers, and the dollars and the planning needed for them, you have to go back to what our citizens have said. This is their community. This is where they live. All they're asking, and nothing unreasonable, is just to stop, take a breath, let's have some discussions, let's figure out a compromise that's going to work for everyone and for them. That's not asking for the world. So that's where I'm coming from.
I think Ms. Bobby wanted to respond.
I mean, the temporary, the emergency ordinance does have like a 90-day ticker. And so we would have to still work through all of this to come up with it's a temporary ordinance basically. So we would have to work through all of it to come up with the ordinance that we wanted to finally come up with. But at the same time, then those people aren't losing their bank loan, they're not losing their contractor, they're not losing their place. Home builders are so busy right now that they're waiting months to be able to even start. They could lose their place. I mean, it could really affect somebody to where they could not build on their property that they own, be paying a mortgage on it for a year. I mean, so it does have quite the domino effect, and I think that we need to just keep that in mind.
Ms. Davis.
So, thank you for the discussion, and thanks staff for their work. I mean, I see both sides of this. I do feel that, I mean, we need, we are listening to the folks here. I think that, as Ms. Hoppy also suggested or also mentioned, I mean, there's two types of people here. There's our citizens that are going to be impacted if we allow the 3-story, 35-square monsters, But then there could be people, as we've all seen when we've put in emergency moratoriums, that are, halfway, 3/4 in process, that you just kind of pulled the carpet out from under them. They too are our citizens. So you could have citizens that are working on their, as one of the members of our community mentioned today, it could be a 2-story, very nice set home that would fall under this moratorium, where if we provided a little bit of give and take if we are going to do this emergency moratorium, that allowed those who have possibly are in works, and I'm not talking developers, I'm not talking about the plumber, I'm talking about the homeowner who might have the process, or the person who just bought the property and is doing that. They are our citizens as well, and also the folks that are impacted by the height. I do feel, by creating a set type of moratorium on what's allowed, if we do the temporary bulk plane as what we kind of have seen our neighboring communities do, that's not going to create a 3-story building, which is exactly what we're hearing people don't want. It's kind of a happy medium that we still show that we want to revitalize our community, but we want to respect our neighborhoods. So, I mean, I see both sides of it. I think, the good news is the time frame. It's not like we're saying this is going to take 12 months, one way or the other. And I also don't think that we're rushing into it. I don't think anyone said, hurry up and do it. So I don't think we're rushing into it, but I think we are looking at both sides of the folks who could be in process, and the folks that also want us to be cognizant of their neighborhoods and their views and those types of things. So I think if we could set something up that still provided a little bit of flexibility, that would be nice for those that might be in process.
Do I have any other new information anybody on council would like to contribute? I'm going to call for Ms. Wooden.
I was just wondering if Ken or Patrick could walk through what Janice said. So it is a temporary ordinance that can be changed, right?
Yeah, an emergency ordinance, as Ms. Hoppy said, is only good for 90 days.
Right.
So after 90 days, you'd have to officially approve it through the normal first and second reading as is, or make changes to it. So I think it's what she was
So the
suggesting.
changes could be made during the process.
Yes.
Of input from everyone. And then as far as how this would affect someone, let's hypothetically say there is someone who has bought a lot or a home and is going through this process, would it mean them going back to their, let's say this takes effect, and it means them going back to their architect, their builder, and talking about these changes and how they're going to move forward through that teeny portion of it, right? I just want to outlay, what would it mean for a resident? What would it mean for the resident you just talked about?
Yeah, a couple things. I think there could be, I don't think that someone that's already well along into the design process, kind of taking advantage of the existing regulatory environment just to a full extent, would obviously have to make some fairly significant design changes potentially. Those design changes could be a matter of, lopping off a story. They could be a matter of, pushing in the setbacks to a lesser standard, which would have significant impact on structural documents and plumbing, the whole plan set. But a related note that I wanted to just put in council's minds as well, and it doesn't impact one of the other approaches more than the other, but is that the city has a fairly unique vested property rights. We have statutory vested property rights, which we're required to have by state law. So every community, every jurisdiction has to say what it means to have a vested property right. A vested property right means that you have a right to do something as a property owner regardless of whether a city or a jurisdiction changes the rules, right? And in the city of Wheat Ridge, we've taken a fairly conservative approach to what a vested property right is defined as. We define a vested property right as substantial reliance on an approved building permit. So again, regardless of the approach, people that might submit for a building permit in 2 weeks, but then have to go through a 2 to 4 week review process, and then they have to actually substantially rely on that building permit. We don't define what that is, but typically that means kind of moving dirt, or you could define it a few different ways. But that vesting doesn't occur. Someone that came in and applied for a permit tomorrow wouldn't necessarily vest as a property right for 30 or 45 days. So there will be people kind of impacted by this in different ways that are hard to predict, regardless of which approach is taken.
Was there something you
I just got to maybe add to that. You could define that, I think, a little more specifically, which we have done with past moratoriums, I believe. You can say anybody that's gotten to this point. I'm not sure how we would define it, but anybody, or just say anybody that has to have a building permitted in before they're exempted from this moratorium. That would probably be the easiest, but I think there's other definitions we could use, correct?
There are. We typically define what it applies to. So is it new applications for business license or building permits is typically the language you'd use, but then you just have kind of this inherent conflict in that, but if we change things before they actually firm up that vested right, then potentially we're in a position of telling them there's new rules. So
Would you have to define that building permit, though? It wouldn't be like I just got a permit for my bathroom. It would be like where you moratorium on building permit. That seems very broad.
Specifically I think as Monica's motion has made in our R1C zone districts for buildings that are 3 stories or what, there might be more specific language that Kim could come up with, but.
Yeah, because I wouldn't want to say building permit, but if it's somebody considering a 3-story building moratorium
In a
or
certain
something.
zone district.
Yeah.
So if I could just ask a question.
Are you going to propose your?
Well, here's what I wanted to say and be clear on. And it says here that a temporary moratorium would be on new structures, permits, and we could include R1C in there, in addition to existing structures which are greater than 2-story or taller than 25 feet. So it's a temporary moratorium on building permits for R1C for new structures and additions to existing structures which are greater than 2 stories or taller than 27 feet. I think that specifies it pretty clearly. What's that? No, I'm not penalizing everybody. I'm just keeping it to R1C and its new structures and its addition to existing structures which are greater than 2 stories and 27 feet.
Is that clear?
It's
So what
clear.
you're, that you're,
Yes.
the moratorium on new structures, period, or,
A temporary moratorium, I'll say again, on
Okay.
building permits for new structures. And if we need to add in the R1C,
new structures within the R1C districts?
yes.
Zoning district.
and addition to existing structures which are greater or taller than 2 stories or 27 feet. Exactly how it's stated right here by staff.
Okay. She has proposed a,
Well, I think then
Looking for
the other
consensus.
thing that comes into mind is the emergency part of that. I mean, I guess, again, I have no dog in this hunt when it comes to, the person wanting the 3-story or but I agree. I mean, if a 3-story building's being put up next to me, not sure I like it. But I think the other thing is then if we set this up this way, the way they're saying is just do a temporary moratorium, not an emergency one. If we did temporary, it would also give time for people to come in and also talk to the issue if they were some of these folks in process, in progress, in development. So, I mean, again, I think, I'm just trying to keep both sides, if we do emergency, that's this Monday, boom, done. But if we do just a temporary moratorium, we have a reading and then a second reading, at least it gives folks an opportunity. I'm just kind of throwing it out there because again, there's 2 sides to every.
right,
Is it 2 separate consensus though? I mean,
well, they said you could put them together or not.
It wouldn't have to be. Yeah, I was going to respond to maybe Ms. Davis' comments. Yeah, I think what she was saying is I think we're mixing up temporary and emergency a little bit, but you can do a temporary ordinance on an emergency basis, which means we just do it in one reading. You could do it on Monday. You could do a temporary moratorium through the normal process of 2 readings, which would allow people to come. Yep. Yeah. They're both temporary moratoriums. Yep. You could break it down into 2 motions if you want. If you want to get it out on the table that we're going to do a moratorium, and then make a decision if it's going to be emergency or not. That you could do it 2 separate.
do 2 separate,
Yeah.
okay.
Mr. Fitzgerald and Mr. Matthews, I don't know if you still wanted to. Mr. Fitzgerald, go ahead.
I just would like to ask Councilman Hoppy if in the event that Councilwoman Duran's consensus failed, are you prepared to do a consensus of your own?
Yes, I am.
Mr. Matthews.
Okay, I would like to point out that the additional language the staff suggested, both Councilwoman Duran and I discussed that, and that is kind of a compromise so that people that are already in process with a 2-story home would be exempt from the moratorium. The anxiety of the citizens that are out there with these 3-story structures is that they flat don't want any more, and I agree with them wholeheartedly. And I am very concerned that if we start pushing this back and giving people time to consider, it's going to be just like we did about 3 months ago or earlier, where right before the first of the year we said, well, let's get this passed before the law takes effect. And I can just see if anyone is out there, they're going to come through with 3 or 4 permits for 3-story houses, and then these folks are going to think that we're as phony as we can be because they're going to see that them continuing to go up. The whole idea was the moratorium was to get something going before more damage was done to the neighborhoods. And vehemently against postponing that decision any longer than we have to until we have a time to consider all the facts. And keep in mind, if we change the rules 3 months ago, 3 months from now or whatever in October, there may be somebody in the planning stage that already has a 35-story house that they've been working on for 3 months, and they're going to be out of luck. And that's just luck of the draw.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. Ms. Hoppy?
The suggestion that I made actually would allow people not only with 2-story homes, but then people who were looking at 3-story homes be able to continue, but the 3-story homes would then have to comply within the bulk plan. And if you look in your packet so it's page 4 of the edition, it shows you a picture of the 15 feet and the 45-degree angle bulk plane. So that would allow both people who are building a 2-story and then people who wanted a 3-story. However, they wouldn't be able to build the 3-story box. It would be more like the 2.5-story with the pitched roof is what they would be allowed to do. And
So we would
if
not
we
be looking
then-
at those big square 3-story.
Right, and then, because the bulk plane takes care of that.
It would cut it
And
back.
then we would say, the way we would do it is we would say, if you have applied for your permit and it's gone through a certain percentage of the processing, and let's say we come back and say, well, we want the bulk plane to actually start at 10 feet. If you've already applied for your permit, then you get the 15 feet, but anything beyond that then would be at the 10 feet. And so that's how we would make those adjustments, is by setting those dates.
Okay. I believe that, I think, do you want to make your,
Yes, I'd like to get a consensus. So if I want to combine this, Patrick, I was going to do 2 separate, but I'll just combine them to.
You want to do an
include
emergency?
Emergency, yes.
Just say you want an emergency temporary moratorium, then what, the rest of the language that you mentioned
Okay.
earlier.
All right, so I'd like to get a consensus on an emergency moratorium, a temporary moratorium on building permits for R1C, new structures in addition to existing structures which are greater than 2 stories and taller than 27 feet, to allow our citizens and us to have more discussion on this. May I get a consensus?
Then since it's, she's asking for emergency, it would only be for 90 days. Is that what you want, the 90 days?
Yes.
90 days?
Yes.
And you may have said this, so my apologies, but only in R1C.
Correct.
I did. Could I get a
May I
show
get
of
a
hands on
consensus?
that? Okay, that failed. Ms. Hoppy, I believe you said you had one as well.
Like to get a consensus to do an emergency ordinance for R1C, new construction, so not yet applied for building permit, to have current setbacks with a 45-degree bulk plane starting at 15 feet.
Is this is
It's an emergency, so it's for only 90 days.
90 days, so it's an emergency temporary.
Do we have,
Do I have a show of hands on
show of
that?
hands?
Can I just, I mean, they're very, the outcome's going to be very similar with either one.
It is very similar, yes. In either case,
In
you're
either
blocked
case, there's going to be a
3-foot story.
limited amount on the height
Right.
and all of that.
Right. As I understand it, the only difference is
No, because they still can't do the
They still can't
three-story
do-
box that they want to do. It's, I disagree.
Councilmember Hoppy, can you get me a copy of that wording before you leave tonight?
I'll write it down for you.
Okay,
And just to be clear, so is the intent that that be on August 22nd as well?
Yes, please.
August 22nd. Are we talking about our emergency then? Do we need to check with the attorney?
Well, when we talked about getting something on August 22nd before, I think it was just to do a emergency moratorium. This is actually an actual ordinance with putting new bulk plane and height restrictions in place. So we'd have to get this turned around by tomorrow, basically. I don't know, Ken, is it that easy do you think, with the language that needs to be changed in the code, or?
I guess the language itself is I don't want to say straightforward, but not incredibly complex. But I mean, it won't be an appropriate ordinance unless it has appropriate graphic illustrations that communicate what that means, and we've started to work on those. And again, we just need to get our attorney engaged, and he's not engaged at all at this point on this topic. So
otherwise,
not saying it can't be done. I'm just that's a lot of stuff to figure out tomorrow.
Yeah, we could push for the 22nd, which again means we have to wrap it up today or tomorrow on Wednesday. If we can't do the 22nd, the next day would be September 12th.
If by chance the 22nd is not possible, can we have a special meeting on the study session date that would?
Our next meeting is September 12th because we have a fifth Monday on August 29th, and then Labor Day,
so
September 5th.
I was going to work on the fifth Monday.
Yeah, unless you want to come in on a fifth Monday.
I'd probably be the only one sitting here.
I'd be here, but I'd be mad.
You said the end result's the same, right? Either way?
It is. It is.
Yes.
Don't panic, because I don't think anybody wants any of those three-story monsters either.
No, I'm just disappointed in the fact that our
Monica, you're
Our citizens asked just for more time to have discussions, to figure out what best way to go, avenue to go. So I am hearing that either way, the result's the same. Well, if it is, then why aren't we giving them the temporary moratorium to have more discussions? I mean, that's all they were asking for, bottom line.
We've already passed that, so
I get it, but I had to say that and make it
that's
clear.
okay, I understand.
I mean, the back and forth we just had here relative to the amount of rigmarole it's going to take to present a codifiable solution here is sort of representative of the lack of time we have to put forward something that I think is worthwhile. And that's what the previous motion that Monica made was so appropriate, and that's why I think that moratorium would have been a more appropriate option, because it gave more time to do that.
Complications have been added.
And it's just that time to allow for that is what was necessary, but.
Okay,
I don't know if we got a final consensus, did we, on the second motion? I think Christie asked a question before a consensus was taken.
I thought we did.
I think we kind of interrupted the consensus.
Was it vote?
Was there consensus?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
All right, if the situation occurs that it cannot happen, what's our next possibility?
Well, September 12th is our next meeting.
Okay.
We'll do everything we can to get it to 22nd. We can't promise it will be 100% clear, but we do, if it goes into place on the 22nd, we do have the 90 days during the emergency ordinance period to come back and have discussions and fix any changes, anything that needs changed. So there's still don't think that what's adopted on the 22nd is final. We still have 90 days to make any changes.
And that was kind of my point, was that it's still allowing time, as Mr. Ann said, for us to kind of work out details and to make sure that we meet the needs of our community and that type of thing. It's just not putting brakes on everything. But it still meets very similar criteria.
Just so it's noted, it didn't put brakes on everything.
That's what I'm saying. It didn't put brakes on everything, right? Okay, can we move forward?
We can.
All right. Should we go back to the order we were at?
Yes, and I'd like to thank our guest, Patty Silverstein, for
Thank you all for coming and speaking.
and our citizens, yes. For that moratorium in our agenda, or moratorium, what was I going to say? Detour in our agenda. The next item is an interesting item relevant to the discussion we just had. The agenda item is the Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy, or NRS as we've called it. I think you all received, I don't know if you all received hard copies at one point in your tenure here on councils. If not, it's online also that we referenced. I'm sure you all read it cover to cover. This presentation should be fairly straightforward. But this report was adopted 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago. It's entitled Repositioning Wheat Ridge. And the reason it was done at that time was because we were really looking at the condition of the city in many different factors and metrics, and people are asking questions. Why is Wheat Ridge maybe a little stagnant and not keeping up with our surrounding neighborhoods? And so we hired a consultant team who came out and did a very comprehensive study, interviewed many people. A lot of that most of that information is in the appendix, I believe, of those one-on-one interviews. But the NRS really focuses on leveraging what the city's strengths are, because the city does have a lot of strengths, but there were a lot of challenges at that point back 10 years ago. So the report looked at leveraging both of those to figure out how we can move the city forward to continue being a vibrant and healthy community with a strong housing market and a strong commercial base also. As I mentioned, the report, when it was done, it basically did show that the city of Wheat Ridge did stagnate a lot between 1980 and basically when the report was adopted in 2005. Other cities in Jefferson County were doing a lot of proactive activities to keep their cities moving forward and attracting those strong households that are really important for a community to maintain their vitality and sustainability over time. The primary conclusion that the report came out with was that for the city to regain its strength and reinvent itself as a thriving, economically diverse community with broad commercial and residential opportunities, Wheat Ridge needed to overhaul how the city and residents manage change and develop methods to regain the share of strong households that have been lost over the past 25 years. A good portion of the report and putting the report together too was looking at a lot of different demographics about the city. And there's, I think, a huge appendix in here with tons of graphs and charts that really showed what the city's demographics were at that time and in point. So we felt after a 10-year period here of having this report in place and accomplishing many of the goals and strategies and recommendations of the report. I won't go through those one by one, but Britta Fisher is here, the Executive Director of Local Works, which was one of the recommendations of the NRS report, was to create a nonprofit organization. It was Wheat Ridge 2020 at that time. They recently changed their name to Local Works. But we feel that a lot of the recommendations that were made in this report to move the city forward have been worked on, and we've had a lot of success. So tonight we really want to kind of take a look at Wheat Ridge 10 years later, and that's why we hired Patty Silverstein to help us look at those numbers and give us a fresh look at how the city's changed over these 10 years and see if we've made any significant progress in our demographics. And it's an interesting report, and Patty's full report was attached to your packet also. So, but Patty's going to give a summary. She's got a PowerPoint, and we'll start with that.
Thank you, Patrick. Good evening. As was mentioned then, we took a look at the current state of Wheat Ridge. So that's why we've named the report The State of Wheat Ridge, a profile of our community, our indicators, trends here. As was mentioned, we looked primarily at the past 10 years. So for most of the data points, we tried to look from 2004 to 2014, 2015, depending upon data availability. We looked at 30 plus different indicators of the economic health, and those are within 4 categories: the demographics, the housing, the employment base, and the commercial real estate market here. So I wanted to give you just a brief overview of a few of these as was mentioned, you have the full report there, and I'm certainly happy to entertain any questions or comments about that full report. But starting just as the brief overview here, first of all, taking a look at population, Wheat Ridge's population, a little over 31,000 people. We saw a period of time from 2004 to 2010 when the population was actually flat or declining. Starting in about 2011 now, we've seen an increase once again in the population in Wheat Ridge, which an increase that has really been fairly consistent with Jefferson County. And you will notice in many of these slides then we're comparing what's going on in Wheat Ridge with Jefferson County with also the Metro Denver region. And by Metro Denver, I'm talking about a 7-county area from Douglas County on the south on into Boulder and Adams counties on the north. We've also, in various points throughout the report, are comparing Wheat Ridge to some of the other Jefferson County cities of communities of Arvada, Golden, Lakewood, and Westminster, just to kind of get that sense of how Wheat Ridge has been doing compared with some of the other areas here. In terms of the median age, we have seen that the median age has been decreasing a bit here in Wheat Ridge, although Wheat Ridge certainly has an older population than throughout the rest of Jefferson County and the comparable communities. When you delve into this data a little bit deeper, then you see that this is mainly because the population that is 70 plus in Wheat Ridge represents about 14% of our population, versus in Metro Denver as a whole, that's 7%. So certainly that tends to bring up that age. Also, if we were to take a look at the millennial generation that is getting so much discussion these days, we see that about 20% of Wheat Ridge's population would be within those millennial years of about 18 to 34 years, compared with about 22% of the population at the whole Metro Denver level. When we take a look at the median household income, we find that the income is certainly has tended, even though it has increased over time, it has tended to be still a little bit lower than the comparable regions here in Jefferson County and throughout the Metro Denver region. This is also very much tied with the older population, as older populations typically don't have that working income anymore. So you see again that the median household income then would tend to be a little bit lower. And indeed, you take a look at a concentration of households that are at the lower income groups as opposed to the higher income groups that we might have more at the Metro Denver or Jefferson County levels. The poverty rate here in Wheat Ridge has been increasing. This is probably one of the more disturbing types of findings of this report. We have seen that the poverty rate has increased, but we also need to bear in mind that it wasn't really until 2014 and 2015 that we started to see wages increase throughout the Metro Denver region. So it's kind of, this was still a period of time where many of these households were still struggling after the Great Recession, had not seen their incomes increasing in a meaningful way. So it is possible when we take a look at future numbers that we'll see a little bit of improvement in this, but certainly from the period of time that we've been looking at from 2009 to 2014, a disturbing increase in that poverty rate in the Wheat Ridge area. Turning to our homes then, when we take a look at the home values, we see that the average price or even the median price then in Wheat Ridge is significantly less than what we have throughout Metro Denver or in Jefferson County. This is primarily a function of the housing stock here. You have an age of homes that, the median year for homes to be built, or the median age of homes is a little over 50 years here in Wheat Ridge. 1961 was kind of the median year for development, versus in Jefferson County, that median year for development was 1977. So in Jefferson County, then the homes are about, on average, about 16 years newer, 16 years younger than what you have throughout Wheat Ridge. Now, these older homes also tend to be smaller homes. That was pretty much the design type of standard that was going on at that point. So these smaller homes, these older homes do indeed have a price that it makes them more affordable than what we are finding throughout the Metro Denver region as a whole. Apartments also are more affordable here in Wheat Ridge. What has been rather interesting, though, is that we have a very low vacancy rate here in Wheat Ridge. In fact, the vacancy rate in Wheat Ridge of about 2.6% compares with the vacancy rate in Jefferson County of about 5.3% or Metro Denver of 2.8%. So a very tight market. Nonetheless, the value or the monthly apartment rent is significantly less than what we have throughout the Metro Denver region. Part of the reason for this could indeed be that there is a greater concentration of rent-restricted apartments here, so that does tend to keep those rents a little bit lower than what we're finding throughout the market in the Metro Denver region. Nonetheless, do notice that the average monthly rental rate in Wheat Ridge has indeed been increasing, and increasing at paces that are relatively similar but not quite as rapid as what's going on in the Metro Denver region. Versus in Jefferson County, they tracks very closely with the average rental rates that we have in Metro Denver. This has certainly been a major challenge all throughout the Metro region as we take a look at these apartment rental rates that have been increasing at double-digit rates over the last several quarters. Definitely the affordability has been a question all throughout the Metro area. Turning then to retail space. So when we take a look at the square footage of retail per capita, we find about 74, almost 75 square feet of retail space per capita here in Wheat Ridge, compared with about 60 square feet per resident in Jefferson County, 53 square feet per resident in Metro Denver. So we see this significant concentration of retail activity, and that's one of the reasons why when we take a look at the retail per capita level, if you will, the retail sales per capita, we find that Wheat Ridge does indeed have a higher value than what we have throughout the Metro Denver region. There's a lot of numbers in this chart here, I know, but what I'm trying to demonstrate here is if we start taking a look at some of the various categories of retail activity, a couple of things kind of pop out at us. First of all, when we take a look at retail activity per person in the motor vehicle side, we see that we have a stronger concentration of that motor vehicle trade that happens in Wheat Ridge than throughout the Metro Denver region or the Jefferson County area. That's also the case for food and beverage stores, which indicates that the area is well served by grocery stores and other beverage stores, as well as by service stations. And I think that this probably goes a lot to say about the location along I-70 there, that you certainly get a lot of the truck traffic and car traffic that is filling up their gas tanks along the way. So service stations are very well served here in Wheat Ridge as well. What you do tend to be lacking, however, would be on some of the furniture stores, the electronics and appliances, and the clothing stores. When we take a look at the overall employment growth, we see that we have similar employment growth in Wheat Ridge to what we have seen in Jefferson County and in Metro Denver over the last few years, but we have a very different type of distribution when we take a look at the employment by industry here in Wheat Ridge. Notice, of course, that education and health services very highly concentrated here in Wheat Ridge with Lutheran Medical Center being, of course, one of the major employers within the city. On the other hand, we have lower concentrations of some high wage categories, such as financial activities, professional and business services, the information sector, and the manufacturing sector. All of those lower concentrations mean that the average wage that we have here in Wheat Ridge does indeed tend to be lower than what we have in Metro Denver and throughout Jefferson County. The average annual wage in Wheat Ridge of about $47,900 per year versus in Metro Denver it's about $57,600. So Wheat Ridge is at about 83% of the average wage that we have throughout the Metro Denver area. I think that, it's also, this is important to look at from an economic development perspective, because as you look at the concentrations in various industries in Wheat Ridge compared to the county or the Metro Denver area, you can start to see too where some of the opportunities are for trying to encourage some type of business growth within the region. And then finally, taking a look at some of the commercial real estate. We have very low vacancy rates in Wheat Ridge for both the office space and industrial space, but of course a smaller type of inventory, if you will, here in the Wheat Ridge area. Nonetheless, this very low vacancy rate does mean that the lease rates are a little bit higher here. So we have, on the office side, our office lease rates in Wheat Ridge a little bit more than what we have in Jefferson County as a whole, so $17.60 per square foot compared to $17 per square foot throughout all of Jefferson County. This was the first time in the first quarter of 2016 that we saw that office lease rate surpass that of Jefferson County. On the industrial side, we also see a little more expensive industrial properties here in Wheat Ridge, and this is primarily because Wheat Ridge does have a stock of new industrial spaces that have been built, or at least a little bit younger industrial spaces than what we see throughout the rest of the metro area. About 35 years on average for the buildings in Wheat Ridge compared to 42 years on average throughout the Metro Denver region. So there you have it, just the very brief hit on some of the key indicators. Again, the report has 30 plus indicators that we track. The report indicates why all of these various indicators are important and then talks about the analysis of them. So with that.
Thank you. That's a lot of information.
In there, if I could start, Mayor, there is a lot of information in there, and staff sat down with Patty and kind of looked at this, and keep in mind that the timing of this, the NRS was adopted in 2005, and there was quite a few recommendations in there of things that we should do to move the city forward. And again, those are in your memo. We can go over those in more detail if you'd like. So we started working on those, and we got quite a few things accomplished. But then the recession hit in 2008, a lot of people may disagree about when the recession really ended, and I think we still say the retail sector is still in a recession. But then 2011, 2012 is kind of when most people think the recession was really starting, the economy was really starting to turn. And you look at a lot of the indicators, even though we might be still lower than most of our comparative neighbors in the metro area, we're still seeing some good increases, except for the poverty rate. But I think there's some factors to consider on that one. The poverty rate, obviously our age of our population has a factor on that, and then also just the wage increases. It's taken a while to come out of that, but you look at some of the other factors. So the population's increasing. We had a significant amount of years where our population was decreasing, and we're starting to see a bump up in that. I think that's good news. Our median household income, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but Wheat Ridge has the largest percentage increase in median household income compared to the metro, these other comparables, but we're still low, but it's going in the right direction, and it's increasing a little bit faster than some of the other areas, so that's good news. And there's a few other factors also that we looked at, I think, are all at least going in the right direction. Unfortunately, we had that big bump of the recession that kind of slowed us down. We put a lot of things in place with the NRS, and I believe a lot of things that we have put in place and a lot of the successes we have has enabled us to get to the point we are and to start seeing some improvements in these areas. I think we still have some work to do, and that's kind of why we wanted to bring this to council tonight, to get a sense of where you're at, if this, the vision of the NRS and the strategies and the recommendations in here are still current, if there's any changes we should make. When you read through the NRS, you recognize that a lot of the recommendations really focus on the housing in our city. It really didn't focus on the commercial, because I think, you know, commercial follows rooftops, right? So I think the strategy was that if you focus on getting the right type of housing in your community, you're going to attract more people that want to move into your community. That's going to attract the commercial, and I think we're starting to see that, the commercials. So do we need to focus on the housing portion so much today? I don't know. Should we do more on the commercial? Do we need to focus more on making Wheat Ridge a more beautiful place, or any one of these recommendations that was in the report? So that's kind of the direction that we would like to head in the discussion tonight. So, and again, I mentioned Britta's here, and Steve and Ken, and we can answer any questions you may have.
So I just have a comment, and this is a great report. Thank you. It's very good. This is going to be. Is there any way we could put it more readily online rather than having it be in a packet?
Yeah, of course. Yep. It's and we usually wait. It's still in draft form until after we discuss it tonight, in case there's any changes that we need to make, and then we'll make it final and put it online.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And just a couple comments I have is that. You know, we've always talked about the rooftops and that type of thing. And I think the other thing that we're doing that will help, I know we talked about the rental rates, you know, of apartments and apartment rentals. And I think some of the things that are going on 38th and Upham, and actually we're going to have new market rate apartments rather than not so market rate apartments. I think that will improve the diversity and that type of thing. I think the interesting thing about it is the retail part. And you see, I'd just be curious. I'd love to sit in with other cities to see what they say. Because, I mean, you hear it everywhere. I know we heard about the Big W closing stores and stuff. But recently we just heard Macy's is. Right. You know, so we can pick on one. But even, you know, Macy's and some of those places are closing and streamlining. And I think a lot of it has to do with probably online and free shipping and all of that we all enjoy. So, you know, it's really trying to think about smart retail and what does that look like. And I know, again, you know, a lot of people are like, another grocery store? You know, but, I mean, the other folks aren't building. And so, you know, just that big discussion on where retail is going would just be an interesting one in itself. But I do think the rooftops is a good one. And then I know recently I was at a urban renewal meeting, and there was some interesting things going on in some other cities and what they're doing, you know, for revitalization. But I think the rooftops I completely agree with, but the retail is just an interesting, you know, it's an interesting dynamic right now.
Christy, recently Fitz and I went to a retail conference, and one of the things they said is that people move to a city because they like the city, and then they find employment. So it sounds to me like we need to make our city look pretty darn nice. Okay, who else wanted to speak? Fitz?
I was just going to say, by the way, both Joyce and I have notes about that meeting, and if anybody's interested, I'll be glad to provide my notes, which I've organized. It was a great meeting. It was fantastic. Ms. Silverstein, in your central recommendations, I'm on page 3 for those who are looking. Number 1C is invest in leadership development. Can you tell me what that means?
That's a recommendation from the NRS. Yep. And, you know, I could speak to it, and that was one major component of Wheat Ridge 2020's mission at the point. But it was just kind of as it sounds, investing in leadership for the next generations of your community, finding people that want to stand up, and not necessarily just for city council, but on city commissions and boards, but leadership on school boards, and just leaders of the community, and church groups, and different groups with the schools. And because if you really need to have that compassionate, interested constituency that's interested in making sure that your city stays vibrant, I think, and that's what that was all about, and making sure that you have people to step in as generations move on. And Britta, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, leadership development has been one of the pillars for local work since our beginning, and we discuss it, Mr. Fitzgerald, as the pipeline. So do we have a pipeline in our community of people who are stepping up to the PTAs and the faith communities and to the schools and to all sorts of organizations and clubs, the civic groups? I've been an optimist. I'm finally not the youngest optimist in Wheat Ridge. You know, it's those kinds of things that help indicate some of the health of your community, and also how many people will feel comfortable stepping up. So that's why we've done programs like the Planning and Development Academy and the Wheaties Academy to help people get engaged in the community, how it operates, understand where they can have impact, coming to city council meetings like many people did tonight, how to have their voice heard. That's healthy for a community, and we continue to do that, and we'll continue to ask for support for those activities.
Mr. Matthews.
I always like summarizing things that we've accomplished. And, and I always used to tell my family, my kids, and even my workers at work, celebrate even the minor victories, because they're far and few between. And I'm really appreciative of what we have done. The one gap, though, that I do see in that, and I've talked about this several times in the past, even before I was elected, is the original NRS study was very explicit in stating that our rental ownership ratios of home ownership were upside down. And I see nothing under the list of things to do, or of things that have been done, that we've done anything there to try and address that situation. And I see nothing under what's left to be done that addresses how do we turn ourselves back into an ownership community.
Did you want to add to that, Ms. Hoppy?
Yeah, well, and that's one thing where when I was on the board of Wheat Ridge 2020, we had money through the city council. Well, not when I was on the board. At the beginning, they had money through the city council where they were buying outdated rental stock homes that were not homeowner occupied, and then updating them, upgrading them, and then selling them. Then there was federal dollars from the neighborhood stabilization program to do the same thing, buy the outdated homes. Part of the issue is that our homes require so many dollars to get them upgraded that it makes it kind of hard for the homeowner who's just using it as a rental property to want to put those updates into their property and then make them nicer or sell them. But it's a really good point. Like there's at some point we kind of have a gap in that program again. Once the community block development grants dried up and the NSP monies dried up, that's something, where we were taking old bad homes and getting homeowner occupied, upgraded safety and energy efficient homes on the market. So like that's kind of where we need to go with that, is try to keep that, I think, to keep the bad rentals out and get homeowner occupied homes. One thing I wanted to ask too about that while we're talking about that is in your study, you say part of the reason for a lack of new housing stock in Wheat Ridge is the well-established community with limited amounts of vacant land available for new development. But we did just have 2 new, pretty large housing developments happen, Fireside and Incarnation. And then we also have 2 kind of smaller ones that are going on. There's one over by Prospect Valley, and then
Yukon.
Yeah, and Yukon. So kind of were those kind of taken into consideration when the report was being done, or kind of how did that fall into your reporting?
much of the data regarding homeownership and that type of thing only goes through 2014. So that's the Census Bureau cutoff there. So that's why some of the home values and ownership and that type of thing is not going to be portrayed in the data. We do have building permits that were tracked through 2015, and we did certainly see a significant increase in building permit activity in 2014 and 2015. But again, those units aren't necessarily going to be reflected in some of the other data regarding the housing base there.
You'd said they would not be reflected because they weren't completed.
In the data through 2014, but in the building permits data showed a strong increase in 2014 and 2015. So it may not be totally reflected in the data as of yet.
Okay, Mr. Matthews, you had another question?
One other thing that kind of concerns me is that we keep comparing ourselves to our neighbors. You know, Lakewood has 180,000 people or whatever the population is. Arvada's 120 or 112. We are not those neighbors. We're not Denver. We're not Parker. We're not Jefferson. We're not, Lakewood or Littleton. Arvada can have one subdivision development that can probably exceed the total acreage that we have left of developable property. And I think we may be in a position too where perhaps we need to review a mission statement, is who and what are we and what do we want to be? Because I'm always a little upset when we keep saying, well, we're not like Arvada. But we never will be Arvada, I hope. We never will be like Arvada. Our niche is Wheat Ridge, and I wish maybe there was a way, and I know it's impossible because for one thing we don't have the population base here, to compare ourselves to other 30,000 population centers, even if it's up and down the Front Range, and see how we compare there. But leave us, I still think we need a mission statement of who and what are we going to be. I mean, we've tried to sell ourselves as, a rural atmosphere in an urban environment. And if that's what we want to be, then that's what we have to kind of work with a little bit. I still think we need more commercial. I'm tickled to death to see what's going on with up at, the railroad coming in and the Cabela's development. But we need to keep our expectations in line with the cards that we've been dealt for having so many square miles of land and we're landlocked. Thank you.
Patty? And just as a comment, the communities were selected in keeping with the original NRS document. We'd always be happy to provide a new project that compares Wheat Ridge to whatever communities you would like.
No, don't spend any more money. I think this has been very enlightening,
thanks,
and I really appreciate the work you did, and I find it very interesting. And yes, Patrick, I did read the other 86 pages, whatever it was, a couple times, and that's why I asked you for a separate copy of this, so I could get it up on my big screen on my other computer and really have a chance to dive into it more so than I had this weekend. And we need all the information we can get.
Well, no, I think Mr. Matthews, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but Mr. Matthews make a great point, and I think that's why we're bringing this to you tonight. This is basically one of the established documents in place that staff uses, and I agree. We need to have a council retreat, visioning, missioning, strategic planning retreat to talk about this in more detail. Is this what this council today wants? This was adopted by a different council. Is this what our community today wants? Because this is what we're following. This was adopted as part of our comprehensive plan. So that's thank you for saying that, because that's the whole intent of this. We don't need to talk in depth at this tonight. We were planning a couple phases of this discussion potentially over the rest of the year and bring it back and maybe try to get a little bit consensus tonight if you want to bring back something more specific to talk about, more detail, or if you had enough, this is enough for one presentation, and then we just leave it up to maybe a retreat and re-engage at that point on is this still the right direction we want to go. So thanks.
I had a few comments regarding the real estate and the rentals and bringing different families in. I don't think I have the solution by any means at all, but my comment would be that as a society, not just in Wheat Ridge, Colorado, but as a society, the millennials are the largest population segment right now, and from what that group of people are doing, they aren't necessarily wanting to own right now. And so I think across the United States, we may not be seeing that home ownership as much as in previous years. In the economy, the mobility of people these days, there's a lot of factors as to why that factors into it. I think one thing, or maybe a suggestion that we might look at, is how can we engage the renters that live here in their community, and how do the renters that live here, and there's many people that have lived here for many years and have rented, how do they get engaged in their community and caring about their community, so that some of these issues that we feel that might be due to renters, that we can alleviate some of those issues. So that's one thing we might want to look into, is how to engage our renter community into our city. And if we can transition some of the homes into home ownership, that would be great. We do have a lot of duplexes, we have a lot of apartments here, and so those buildings are probably not going to go away. So we have a certain segment, and I don't know what the percentage is, but we do have a certain segment of renters that we're always going to have in Wheat Ridge. So that was one comment I wanted to make. And then as far as looking at the report as a whole, I thought it was really, really encouraging that as you look at what the original recommendations were and where we are right now, that really many of the items have been accomplished. And I think sometimes it can be hard when you have such a long-range plan. It can be easy to get off course. And the results are that we haven't gotten off course. And so I thought it was really encouraging overall. And then on page 8, where it talks about what's left to be done, the list that starts here, we're working on all these things. The leadership development, we have the Wheaties program going. Zoning and development regulations, we talked about that tonight. Wadsworth, Ward Road Station, 38th Avenue improvements, development of the green. As you go down through every one of these things, we have talked about it in the last few years, and we're still working on it. So I think I was very encouraged by the report, and I'm very encouraged by the projects we're working on right now. So thank you very much.
Anyone else want to comment? And yes, Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As it relates to this issue of home ownership, I think it's appropriate and encouraging to look towards encouraging renters to consider and understand what it would take to purchase a home, and to encourage individuals to purchase homes in the city of Wheat Ridge, and to understand what types of programs we can move people towards. But as it relates to the city engaging in the purchase and fixing up and flipping homes or otherwise acquiring those properties, that I don't see that as being a prudent step for the city to be engaged in, at least in this market, given its sort of current status. It just doesn't seem like that's, whether it be through any other organization or otherwise, it just doesn't seem like that would be a prudent use of our resources, that there could be other efforts that we could do to sort of leverage our resources and some other tools that don't really focus on that specific goal. But I think just sort of number one, looking at this larger issue of homeownership across the country and understanding that a lot of individuals may not be necessarily moving towards that goal, but also understanding that there may be some other areas that we need to focus on. So that would be one concern that I have, specifically because our previous efforts under those types of efforts have been funded by outside sources, and we haven't really used our own resources to do those types of programs in the past. So I would just caution us against trying to move in that direction. And then as it relates to improving existing multifamily rental properties throughout the city, I think working with existing property owners and encouraging investments and trying to come up with ways to identify investment sources for those types of properties, or working with those property owners, that may be something to consider as well. But I would just caution us against overly pushing for any kind of rent-to-homeownership program.
Thank you. Councilmember Hoppy?
Yeah, I would agree with Councilmember Urban, and it's kind of exciting because as you're talking about that, like all these ideas are kind of zinging through my head. Like, what are some things that we could do as a community to help? You know, part of the thing for the millennials is maybe they don't really know the process of how to, you know, buy a house. So you were saying like a rental to home ownership kind of thing, or you know, something where we could do something like the down payment assistance, or you know, do something with like try to figure out some way to motivate the property owners of the bad rentals to, you know, change it maybe through some sort of grant programs or help them with the Excel programs or something like that. And I appreciate your comments because it really brought it like a bunch of stuff just kind of zooming through my head, ideas about that. So thanks, Zach.
Perhaps a marketing program for our own properties. Mr. Fitzgerald?
I'm just going to say I think there are a lot of good thoughts here. As a member of the Housing Authority, I can tell you that the Housing Authority is not going to have any money for at least 7 years, unless Ken can come up with a grant somewhere. But otherwise, we're broke for 7 years, at least 7 years. I agree with Jen that home ownership is an unrealistic goal for many families as our economy now exists. And many people also just don't want to own homes, the younger folk. Our problem is not with all apartments. Our problem is with some apartments. As we all know, there are a high concentration in District 1, for example, of low-end apartments that are not very attractive. And I have an idea on how to attack that, since we are always talking about apartment inspections. I think there might be a way to come up with a sort of a compromise answer in that regard. And I think we should talk, those of us who are involved in those kinds of things should sort of talk outside this meeting and see if we can come up with a compromise.
You know, I'm kind of curious how far Wheat Ridge is off in regard to the amount of rentals we have compared to other cities. I've kind of forgotten.
Yeah.
Was there, I missed that.
Denver recently became a majority apartment city.
Okay.
So,
Patty?
just in terms of the home ownership rate, Wheat Ridge is at about 54%. Our home ownership versus Metro Denver as a whole is about 64%. So that's one measure there. There's also a measure in here about the number of housing units by type, though that doesn't reflect ownership. It reflects the types of units that there are available. And within that, I believe it does demonstrate too that Wheat Ridge has a stronger concentration of the multifamily units than you would find throughout the Metro Denver area.
Denver has a stronger multi-family units. Okay. And
Wheat Ridge has a stronger
Wheat Ridge has a stronger
concentration of the multifamily units than does Metro Denver.
based on our comparison within our population. Got it.
Correct.
Okay. Ms. Duran?
Patrick, I was going to say, I would be interested in bringing this to a retreat to kind of, give it the time that it needs for all of us to go through it, discuss it, come up with different ideas, a different strategy. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you for bringing that up. I was going to suggest that my very self.
Read your mind.
I also would support Ms. Duran in that too.
We'll start looking at dates.
Good, good. Any other commentary or action requested? We're going to look at it some more.
Thanks, Steve. Ken,
Steve,
Patty?
did you want to add anything? Thank you.
We may hire you for another study soon, sounds like. Okay, moving on.
Moving on. Wow, we've got some work here to do yet.
A couple staff reports. Fruitdale School update.
Okay. Thank you, Patty.
think we have a, thanks, Betty. Ken's going to pull up a presentation.
On Fruitdale?
Yeah.
So they didn't get the...
No, okay, just one. Great, thanks, Ken.
We have our developer partners here behind me, Jim and Susan with HEI Development on the Fruitdale School. It's been since February when council was supportive of a development agreement that provides both grant and loan funding that helps make this project happen. It's a very complex project in many regards, from a construction and development standpoint to notably the financing package that it takes to get this really exciting project done. So we've achieved quite a bit on a variety of fronts, including firming up some of the funding. There's still some work to be done and some critical milestones to get past as well, but given your role in this project, your critical role in this project, we thought it was a good time to update you on some of the milestones that we've reached. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim and Susan. Their architect, Ron Ebo, is also here to give an update.
Thanks, Ken. Jim Hartman, 2120 Bluebell in Boulder. And as Ken mentioned, I've got my partner Susan here and Ron Ebo, our architect of record. Can I make this a little larger on the screen? Ken, is there a... Yeah. Is it that one? Oops.
Is it just a PDF?
Yeah. So is that as big as it gets? Okay.
We could all stand closer.
No, I just was trying to show the bottom of each screen, but yeah, how should I do that?
Can you just drag it?
Just drag it up, yeah, but then he has to manually, I think he can do, I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to find it quick enough.
Well, we can make do. So anyway, as Ken mentioned, we're very happy to be back and give you a brief update. It's been 6 months or so since we were last year talking about the project, and there has been a lot going on. So let's see, Patrick, this way?
Or use your, try that. You can just knock your arrow on your keyboard.
Okay, I got it. We can do it that way, okay. Okay, I'll do this way. So just one thing to focus on in this image. We don't have solar panels on the roof of the 50s building anymore. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. So some of the things that have been happening over the last 6 months, there's been a lot of work that has happened primarily through city staff and the school district for the land swap, a lot of great work to set up all the entitlements that will be necessary. The second bullet, the Jeffco folks, the community development group there has been very diligent, and they've committed another $40,000 to the redevelopment, which helps the numbers. The biggest news and the longest time issue actually over the last 6 months has been working on the tax credits. A very brief summary of that process is that it's regulated by the National Park Service, and they've taken a long time, and it's really due to some family medical issues from the guy that was reviewing it in DC. He just wasn't able to spend as much time on it as he wanted to, and they were short-staffed, so he wasn't able to hand it off. But it just took a lot longer than we anticipated. One of the results is that there's less rentable area, and each of the apartments is somewhat smaller as an average apartment size, but we still do have 16 total apartments. The mix of apartments now is 2 one-bedrooms, 2 three-bedrooms, and 12 two-bedrooms. So we still have a majority of 2s and 3s. Then this is the issue I mentioned earlier, and I'll show you a site plan that shows how we've reconfigured the solar power in a little bit. Ken and I were talking this morning. We'll probably have some minor amendments to the purchase agreement and development agreement soon to just deal with the extended schedule. Some good news on the historic tax credit front. We have committed approximately half of the value of the total $2 million package, and this rate that equates to $900,000 is at a higher rate than we had planned on. We had planned on a 85% 15% discount rate, and we ended up with just a 10% discount rate on the state historic tax credits. So that was some really good news. And this is Commerce Bank is a really well-known large bank. They're very reliable. They helped write the most recent state tax credit amendment, the new law that's in place this year. So we feel really good with them as a partner. We're not quite there on the federal historic tax credit investor yet. We're talking to several folks, and we'll have an update for council on that, hopefully fairly soon, as well as the final choice of our construction lender. We did submit for the State Historical Fund grant, and there was a lot of volume this round, over $7 million in applications. Just weren't able to fund everybody. And we're talking internally whether it's appropriate or not to resubmit a second application for that. We have submitted a grant to the Anschutz Foundation for mostly sustainable issues related to some of the energy and solar power issues and features of the project. And there'll be another grant application in the fall for electric vehicle charging. We recently got a very positive market study from James Real Estate Services, one of the most respected groups in Metro Denver doing those kind of things. And we've selected Ron and his group as the architect of record. He's very experienced with these kinds of projects. And one of the milestones recently was conceptual agreement with the code officials, both building and fire, on how to treat some of the important code issues, not only for the building, but for the site, which is a real hurdle in many renovation projects. And Ron, if you'd like to come up and just talk a little bit about your firm and some of your thoughts related to this project.
Well, I just want to say that I've known Jim for a very long time as a colleague, fellow architect. I think we first met when he was the chair of the Denver American Institute of Architects Historic Preservation Committee, and I was the chair of the board then. But we're really thrilled to have Susan and Jim as clients. I'm a resident of Wheat Ridge. I sit on the Building Department Review Committee, and in my business is in Lakewood. And Jim and Susan have spent countless hours developing this design, working diligently to make sure that this is going to be a quality project, and I've got to tell you that they're really committed to this.
Thanks, Ron. We're very happy to have him as our architect of record, and his staff is doing a great job just cranking out some really detailed drawings for us now. Another thing that we've recently done is we've selected Palace Construction as our contractor, and for those of you that know Palace, they've been around 50 years, as their little logo shows. They're very experienced with this kind of project, housing and renovations of historic buildings. One of the reasons that we picked them is they have a great project team. And some of the members of council mentioned tonight how busy everybody is in the construction industry. Sometimes it doesn't matter so much who you pick as a firm, it's really who you get. That's the day-to-day people working on the job. The project manager, the superintendent, and the project engineer that will all be assigned to this project are very capable folks. They're working on a number of complex renovations right now up in Boulder with Boulder Housing Partners. They're going to come lock, stock, and barrel to our project this fall, and they're very excited as well as capable. The superintendent is a fellow named Dennis Goldman. He's coming to the community meeting that we're having tomorrow night. He's that interested in the project, even though he's months away from being on site to build it for us. And that is the community meeting tomorrow at the rec center. That will be just receiving whatever comments and questions from the community that may come, answering as many as we can, and getting back to folks on various issues. And then schedule-wise, it could be as late as December, it could be a little bit earlier this fall that we're planning to purchase the property and start construction. And then fourth quarter of next year will be all finished. The site plan has changed just a little bit. You can see the backside of the project, which we've always planned on doing solar. There is a little bit more solar now back there because we had to take it off the roof of the gym and the cafeteria to get the Park Service to approve the project. And then we've been spending a lot of time with Ron's team and their landscape architect working on the actual refinement of the landscape design. PKM is our landscape architect working with Ron's team, and they're doing a great job. They've really started to hone in on some of the overall vision that we had for making this a beautiful site. This Temple Buell Garden is going to be very nicely planted with some historic rose bushes and some of the other features that were there historically. And we're going to do a little meandering path through here with a bench and an information plaque underneath these two historic trees. And then the fruit orchard is throughout various species of fruit trees. And it's going to be a really nicely landscaped site and hopefully a pleasure to live here. And one of the comments earlier that makes, I remember in this discussion, is making the rental residents here really feel a part of the community and want to engage because they love living here. That's often one of the things that some rental communities don't quite get there with, is the love of the place that they live. And we really want the people that live here to love where they live. Ron's firm has been refining our floor plans, the layouts. This is the garden level one. It's going to be a very nice 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom unit, kind of tucked away on the back side of the project. This is the plan for the cottage out on the southwest corner of the site, a nice 3-bedroom rental house. And then the real main event is the main building and all the loft apartments in all the various spaces. And we're working real diligently with Ron to create some real specialness in some of these. The second floor, one of the changes that I can tell you a little bit about here is the back side used to be 3 apartments and now it's just 2, primarily because the Park Service wanted this corridor that's now wide to stay wide, even though it was not original to the building. They felt it was historic enough. So that's one of the reasons for this. But we still kept one of the really important features that we wanted to always have in the design, these loft apartments in the front of the second floor. So we've got a couple of spiral stairs that bring you up to some pretty cool space up in the attic level. So next steps, we'll be selecting our remaining tax equity partners or at the federal level and the redevelopment lender, finishing up the detailed design with Ron's firm and all of his engineers and landscape architect, confirming the final financial amounts with the performer right before closing, finishing the project again in late 17, and then starting to pay you guys back in 18. So thanks very much for your support as always, and we'd love to answer any questions that you might have.
That looks pretty good, doesn't it? Lots of questions and comments. Ms. Duran, you want to start?
Yes, I do. Thank you for your presentation. It really looks awesome. I know last time we discussed this, we talked about a community area, either inside. Any plans for that? I didn't see anything.
I think 2 things. There's an opportunity, I think, to potentially host still like outside public events, potentially less so because it's a residential project now. The owner developer is committed to making available, and we haven't agreed to terms to this yet, but the inside of the building periodically for people to have tours. The main hall on the first floor is intended to be very much a historic hall that really highlights some of the history of the project and make that available as an educational resource to the community, just in a managed way, since it's also people's home at this point. So, Jim, I don't know if you want to speak more to that.
Well, there is one other thing that I'm glad you asked that question, because the center area of the site, which is one of the most visually attractive because it's surrounded by all this landscape. As you may know, there was a farmer's market that was operating in Wheat Ridge. I forget exactly the site, but they're not operating this year.
Right.
We've talked to that group, and they're really interested to come here. And we're going to maybe start as early as next year if we can maintain their interest.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Other comments? Are you nodding your heads? Is it looking good?
They're saying good.
I see some thumbs coming up.
Well, thanks again for
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. Good to see you, Ron. Okay, I think we can move on Traffic signal.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Scott Brink is here, also answering questions. This is somewhat of an update. This is a new traffic signal that we're going to be constructing and installing at 32nd and Xenon. We've entered into a draft cost-sharing agreement with the Applewood Shopping Center to pay for this traffic signal. This location at 32nd and Xenon is the major south entrance into the Applewood Shopping Center. And through traffic studies, we've determined about 40% of the traffic coming in and out of that intersection is because of the shopping center, and the rest is pass-by traffic. So we have drafted a cost-sharing agreement to reflect that usage, 60-40 split, and the city also paying for the design, and Applewood Shopping Center is paying for the traffic study. We also, when the 32nd Avenue widening project was completed or constructed a couple years ago, a portion of the right-of-way in front of the Wells Fargo's bank that's owned by Applewood Shopping Center was needed for the widening of the project. It took out some of the parking for that bank. So we had told them at that point that the city would replace their parking somewhere else on the site. They decided not to do that because the bank closed. So we have a credit, or they have a credit. We have an amount due to Applewood Shopping Center in the amount of $56,500, I believe. That was the estimate of the cost, or $58,500. That was the estimate of the cost that it would cost us to replace their parking for them for giving us that right away for free. So we told them that we would put that towards this project. So if council agrees with this, we can get a new traffic signal installed at this location. The total cost with the credit due to Applewood Shopping Center would be $210,000 for the city's portion. Applewood Shopping Center would pay $46,000. That's with their credit. So there's quite a bit of redevelopment proposed for the Applewood Shopping Center, and what triggered the most current need for this traffic signal at this location is the new fueling station that King Soopers is going to construct that side of the shopping center. But Applewood is also working on it in phases. They're bringing it to us in phases. The corner piece at Youngfield and 32nd, I think they're just about wrapping up their lease agreement with a new Starbucks that will go in the corner with a drive-through. It'll replace the Starbucks that's currently in the center. We just met with them last week to discuss a new restaurant that will replace will go on the parcel that the Wells Fargo drive-through is right now, the old drive-through area off of Youngfield. So there's going to be quite a bit of development and redevelopment in this center, which hopefully is going to increase our tax base and solidify that as a major retail center. And potentially there's been some discussions with the Applejack liquor store too to potentially make some improvements to that area too. So, Scott, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think just to reiterate what Patrick said, that this signal was actually contemplated back when the 32nd and Youngfield project was under development. It was traffic study was done then, and it was actually, I think, warranted back then. And with the recent plans going on there with the King Super fueling station, it is really, push it over the edge, I guess, as far as the traffic and the warrants and needing the signal there for safety. We did actually go through a public process on this recently, kind of without having a drawing here and showing it more in detail, but the driveway coming out of the shopping center, there is a neighborhood street from the south, Xenon Street, actually kind of lines up, not directly with it, it's kind of off a little bit, off kilt. So we had two or three different proposed designs for the signal there that did affect the access to Xenon Street. So we did have a public meeting back in November, December. Took quite a good deal of public input on that and settled on a design that we're pretty comfortable with, that we feel safe and will allow the traffic to get in and out, but also maintain the through traffic on 32nd. So we're ready to move forward. Kind of depending on timing with the King Super fueling station, but we
feel it's going to be happening pretty soon here, or needs to happen. Any questions, I can be happy to try and answer those.
But then funding, as I mentioned, the city's portion, after we pay back, we pay off what we owe Applewood Shopping Center for the right-of-way purchase. Our total is $210,500. We have $100,000 budgeted in the CIP budget for projects such as this. The additional $110,000 can come from a couple different areas. We could take it from general fund reserves, or we do have excess tax increment right now for the Kipling Ridge project. That's currently under a TIF agreement, and the city has debt service for the loan that the city or the Urban Renewal Authority took for that project. But we're projecting to have, I think, over 180,000 probably left in that special fund at the end of this year after we pay off the debt service that's required for this year. So typically, you know, you could do different things with that 180,000. You could give it back to the city, or you could try to pay off the loan a little bit sooner. But those funds are available for any. Since this area, this 32nd Youngfield Applewood Shopping Center is in the I-70 Kipling Urban Renewal area, where the Kipling Ridge project is also, you can use these excess TIF dollars for projects within the urban renewal area. So this project would be eligible for the use of those funds, or we could also look in the CIP budget, urban renewal also has some additional unallocated funds that could be spent. Steve said, I don't know if he's told the board yet, Christy, but he would have to take it to the board to get their approval. But he says they could fund the additional $110,000 for this traffic signal. So a couple different areas that we could fund the remainder $110,000 from. So
Not necessarily a decision for council.
well, yeah, I mean, we'd like a little bit of direction. Yeah, that's
Okay.
on that.
Direction. Council, you got some thoughts on this? Christie?
So you don't really want a consensus, you just want discussion.
Well, no, I would like a consensus on, yeah, especially if you're going to be using it from the Kipling Ridge, because, you know, you could be using those excess dollars to pay off the loan sooner, or you could put it into this project. So I would like a consensus if that's the direction you'd like to go, or urban renewal funds. That would be an urban renewal decision. If you'd like consensus to tell urban renewal to find the funds, I guess we could take that also.
Well, I'll certainly let Christie talk to the urban renewal funds, but I would suggest that we take the money from Kipling Ridge.
Which helps, there's a debt service in there as well, though. Mr. Urban?
I guess if we don't have them allocated, or we're not planning on using them for other purposes, using it from the Kipling Ridge proceeds, and if I haven't looked at what the loan structure is on that at the present time, but it would seem prudent to use it from there. I did have a question relative to the swath of land that we went through a condemnation on for Regency.
Yes.
And what the status of that land was.
Yeah, that was completed, and I'm sorry if I don't know if we brought an update back, if it was a council issue or more urban renewal, we can get you an update, but it was a very small swath. Yeah, it was very narrow strip on the south side of the shopping center, but just kind of, is it north or south of Noodles? I can't remember exactly. South of Noodles, yeah, and it'll be north of, yeah, drops down. It was the quiet title was honored or issued through the court system, and the Urban Renewal Authority was able to purchase that. I think they allocated $5,000 towards it. It was like 170. Do you remember how much it was? Yeah, it wasn't even $1,000 to.
I think it was like $800
to purchase it.
That we have to keep. The bank has to hold it for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
Until someone might come and say that was my property.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was like 870.
We didn't know who the owner was. It was really strange up in the air thing.
And so we've already spent some urban renewal monies in that arena or in that areas.
Yes.
So
Yep. We have. It didn't come from the Kipling Corners project, but it did come from Urban Renewal General Fund. Yeah.
So I would just be curious from the urban renewal standpoint, and I'll have to talk to Steve Moore, of where those funds are coming from? Because I know, like, there's certain things we can only spend.
Yeah.
You know, like the Wheat Ridge Cyclery monies can only
in
be
that
on the
area.
38th Avenue corridor
Yep.
and that type of thing, so.
It would come from your general budget.
Yeah,
The city
so-
gives urban renewal, what, 400,000 a year, and yeah, so he feels there's a fund balance in the general unrestricted funds that could cover that.
So I'd almost be more apt to use, and again, it's the Urban Renewal Group's decision, but to use that fund balance and pay down the debt, or maybe do a little bit of both, kind of a happy medium so that we can pay off that debt.
Just a reminder, the debt is a 10-year term. Our debt service, we have 2 interest payments a year and 1 principal payment. It's about $450,000 a year is the total debt service, but based on the revenues that are coming off the Sprouts and the Starbucks, and keep in mind we still have 1 vacant pad. Once that vacant pad comes in, hopefully it's going to even bring in more revenues. But we have an excess above and beyond what the debt service is for an annual basis. So that's what those dollars are. And it's in a special fund. It's set aside. It's not in the city's dollars. It has to be set in a special fund, which, as Chrissy mentioned, we could use it to pay off the debt sooner and knock that 10 years down to 5 years or whatever, or we can use it for projects.
It's kind of the same money, just you're going to.
Oh, it is kind of the same money, yeah.
If you use CIP, then that's the money you would put in there. Go ahead, please. Councilmember Hoppy.
Okay, so you said annually, you have 180.
Well, that's what we're projecting we'll have in excess at the end of this year.
At the end of this year?
Yeah.
And this is our first year collecting on that?
Yes. First full year would be, it started last June, so I think it was like 1 full year this June-ish, yeah.
I think I would be inclined to use the TIF surplus this time around for that. And then I just want to mention that if you go into that shopping center around lunchtime of the high school, then you're taking your own life into your own hands trying to make a left turn out of there. And so I'm really, for safety purposes, thankful that we'll have a light there because, yeah.
Minute, 30-second.
Yeah.
Busy.
Mr. Fitzgerald.
So I'd like to offer a consensus that we take 110,000. That's the total that we have to have, $110,500 out of the Kipling Ridge TIF fund for use in this project.
Purchasing traffic signal. Show of hands, please. Okay.
Yeah.
If that's, maybe
Yeah.
you need to add that to that.
Yeah.
After review by the Urban Renewal Authority.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Snow
let's-
removal policy,
Snow
Mr.
removal.
Brink. It's coming. It's
Yeah.
coming.
Well, I know the summer's flying by way too fast for everybody, so I feel bad, bringing this up and talking about it. But we felt we needed to get it in front of you here before fall hits here, because if council does elect to go ahead with some of what we're talking about in here, an ordinance, for example, there is a process there. We'll have to go through a first, second reading. So at least we'll be prepared when the snowflakes hit. And usually the early part of the year is when we tend to get the most complaints on these kinds of things. I think with the sidewalks, the daylight is at the shortest, and plus just the first few snows in general are always a headache. So there's just a couple things, I guess just highlighting from the last time we talked back in February at study session. At the time, I think there was a general consensus feeling by council to look at the ordinance a little further. Basically what that means again is any property owner would be responsible for removing the snow from their sidewalk adjacent to their property, typical of what most other cities have. We also looked at places perhaps where the city could contract for additional services if there are locations where it's difficult for a citizen to shovel the sidewalk. It may not necessarily be adjacent to their property, or it could be along some of these arterial streets where we see a lot of foot traffic, but the properties maybe don't necessarily front on that street, and there's a privacy wall, those kinds of places. So we are working, getting some quotes from some contractors as we go through the budget process, if we do want to try and expand those services beyond what we do now. The park staff right now does do some removal on trails like Crown Hill, the city facilities, the rec center, City Hall here and so forth, but from a staff standpoint, they're pretty much maxed out with what they can do, so that's why we're looking at these contract services, which we also use to some extent now. For our bus shelters, we do have a contract service for the cleaning of those, the trash removal. It does include some snow removal. So again, as we get into the winter here, if there's places where we can do some extra services, we'll give you some numbers to propose in the budget there.
Scott, could I interject there? Another example of that is those areas that are caused by CDOT and city plows. I know those are some areas that we've had issues with in constituents, and which is, they have a good point. It's, snowplow comes in and dumps a big ol'. And if you read the ordinance, the draft ordinance, pretty closely, the definition of snowfall does not include that type of accumulation of snow and ice on the sidewalks. So this ordinance would not impact those areas of the city that Scott causes snow to build up, or CDOT. So that might be an area that we may want to look at to maybe we bring in services to clear those sidewalks after the snowplows have hit them. But that's just an example.
Yeah, and then last thing I'll add on this too is, again, when we talked back in February, and being this would be kind of a new thing to throw on the citizens here, we'd maybe take a little bit more of a softer approach with this. A lot of good public education, getting the word out there. We'd probably issue more warnings than we would actual citations to folks. So kind of deal with it as we go here from a public safety standpoint, and get the public educated. So yeah.
So the discussion we need is to whether to bring this ordinance to fruition.
Yeah,
Some commentary about
that,
this?
and then also, do you want staff to continue looking at pricing for some of these orphan areas that we talk about? And if you want to identify specific orphan areas too, that would be helpful.
Including where CDOT
Yes.
dumps a pile.
Yep.
Mr. Matthews?
Okay, I've got 3 or 4 questions I had highlighted here, and the first one was 24 hours. Homeowners out of town for the weekend, he may not, that 24-hour, I don't know if we should have a little grace period for homeowners versus businesses where they're open every day. But I can just see if, someone leaves on Friday night and it snows and he gets back Monday night, he's automatically, unless he's made arrangements with the local teenager, he's automatically defunct when he's out of town. Did we ever consider looking at defining snowfall as something like maybe over an inch of snow? Or, some definable amount there where, if you get a half inch of snow, well, and you don't get out and shovel, we're going to give a guy a fine or a ticket 24 hours later, and if the sun hasn't come out. And I was curious too, is what is the fine amount? What would be the penalties for not following that?
I think there's a general penalty in the municipal code that covers all violations. I think it's up to and including $1,000 or $999 is what a code, I believe. Mr. Dahl would be able to answer that, but it doesn't. We usually don't have specific fines for specific code violations. There's one fine section in the code. I'd have to look it up, but
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
For a homeowner, if he does get dinged, how much is it going to cost him?
Yeah. Well, if it's through the court process, again, they could go through court, and I think the judge has that ability up to $999. But you could set a separate fines fee structure, I think, for this if you wanted to, and that's if you ask us to bring this back, we can look into that further.
Possible fee structure, okay.
I'll just add too that, I mean, that's probably a good question about the accumulation. But the way the ordinance is written, and this is one that a city attorney pulled out that's pretty typical of what's used in a lot of cities, and it just defines snowfall as any natural accumulation of snow, ice, or sleet. So it's pretty wide open. I mean, we could look at that further if you know, if council really wants a, you know, put an established, you know, measurement in there, we could certainly do that. And then as far as the 24 hours go, yeah, that again, that's typical. I think it's really more of an issue, I think, where the heavier pedestrian traffic is. If it's in one of the busier corridors where people are trying to get to transit, yeah, I think it's a little more critical. If you're off in a neighborhood street where maybe nobody will even notice it's not shoveled, you know. And again, from an enforcement standpoint, we'll be taking this on a more of a complaint by complaint basis, public safety taken in mind as well.
It's meant to give us the ability for enforcement versus to be out pestering and being nuisance cops, let's put it that way. I believe Mr. Urban had his hand up next.
I guess as it relates to this Part D, where it says any person who controls, owns, occupies property that abuts or adjoins any sidewalk open to the public owes a duty to all persons such sidewalk to comply with provisions of the section. Any person injured by the breach of such duties shall have a cause of action for damages against the person who fails to comply with such duty, it being the express intent of this section to impose civil liability on private property owners for injuries incurred on public sidewalks within the city as a result of the failure by any such private property owner to comply with this section. It seems somewhat explicit and heavy-handed as it relates to.
Thank you, Zach. I had yellowed that whole paragraph, but I forgot to put a red sticky note next to it of what I
I
meant.
get that if someone falls and slips on my sidewalk, it's my legal responsibility as a property owner. But why do we call that out in this ordinance? What's the purpose?
I'm going to guess it's to relieve the city of that sort of.
The city's already has that limit of liability in our government immunity.
We don't, honestly. Today we don't. If somebody slips and falls on a sidewalk because of ice or accumulation buildup, the city can be sued. We've had a couple lawsuits. I don't know if it means we have to have this language in here to take the liability. This, again, as Scott mentioned, this was an ordinance ordinance that I think Mr. Dahl drafted several years ago. So we can note that section and ask him if does it need to be in there, if it can be.
I just don't see the
language,
the benefit of including that in a snow removal ordinance. That seems more of a language in a homeowner's insurance policy. So
I think Mr. Fitzgerald may have a solution.
Oh, yeah. I agree that it sort of encourages people to sue the homeowner. Right. We could say that in a positive way by just saying the city should not be responsible for the homeowner's refusal to or lack.
Danger.
Yeah.
Take it from a positive direction instead of a wavy. I think Ms. Davis wants to say something.
So I'm happy to see this. Everyone knows weeds and snow drive me crazy, and I'm happy to see it. And I respect and I do think we need a time frame in there. I'm not sure about anyone else, but if I'm gone, I let my house sitter or my neighbor know where the snow blower is, and that type of thing, or my neighbors know when they do it anyways.
Right.
And I think, again, this is more kind of a nuisance. I think the thing about that is, and I live by a school, so I see it more, and I see, kids trying to dredge through it and that type of thing. But I think without having a type of time frame there, why have an ordinance? And I do think all of us in our neighborhoods know, oh, geez, they must be out of town because they normally shovel their sidewalk. And we're not going to call that person, but it's the person who routinely does not shovel that we know, is it's hard on the kids going to school. It's hard on folks trying to walk to the grocery store, whatever it might be. But I think that I don't think our intent is to, again, punish people who routinely shovel their sidewalks. So I think it's hard not having a time frame in there for that reason. And then if the person came to court and said, hey, here's my trip to Hawaii tickets, and I was in Hawaii, and I asked my neighbor to do it, and she fell and broke her ankle or whatever. I mean, I think the courts could make a decision based off of that.
So you feel that
I
the
do feel
24-hour
like we
notice
do
is
need,
necessary?
yeah,
but
24 hours. And then based off of
the snow ends.
some of the public comment, it would be interesting to look at that more, you know, after our first year or so, the 24 hours, and see if we need to tighten that up for businesses, you know, a time frame, because not only is it, you know, that there's elderly or folks, but there's also a lot of us who work who, when we get home, we can shovel, but maybe we don't do it at 4 in the morning. So, and then I think the other thing about the definition with the depth of snow might be a nice idea as well.
I'd like to call on Mr. N.
I support this ordinance. What I'd like to see, also with the depth of snow, I mean, natural accumulation could be a lot of different things, but I also would like to see a fee structure. You know, I don't want this to be a burden on our citizens. I want them to feel like they have some recourse with having an ordinance, but I'd like to have or see a fee structure in there. And also, I would like to see how it works after a year, and maybe changing that for businesses to 12 hours, and then residential to 24. That's about all, just kind of stating what the rest and everyone else has stated. Thank you.
Councilmember Hoppe.
As far as everybody's tweaks, I agree with the majority of the tweaks. I'm not so sure about the fee structure, just because with all of our code ordinance, and like, I felt like a broad stroke time and stuff like that was no good, but then we had talked about it's more efficiently for the code enforcers, but we can look at that. But abandoned areas I would like to discuss. Wadsworth from 38th to 44th, and then from 44th down the hill to the trail. People are always walking in the street during the winter.
Is that what we were talking about, those services are concerned, city services?
What, 32nd Avenue from about Parfait to east to kind of the corner, basically. East. Yeah, east. With the hill, yeah. West of Kipling. So I would say Kipling west to Parfait on 32nd Avenue. On the north side of that street, high schoolers and elementary students are trudging in knee-deep snow through there. There are.
Oh, okay, nobody.
And then, yeah, and so then there's also from that intersection of 38th and Kipling North, there's that like you said, there's that big kind of fence privacy wall, and I think that property just sold, but I don't know what kind of use it's going to be. But down the hill then is always a mess. Now we did just put in the big sidewalk across the street, so I don't know. Yeah. And then the 32nd Avenue between Wadsworth and Pierce is in pretty good shape on the north side. Am I thinking about this right? But then the south side of the street is usually in pretty bad shape. And I know that Ms. Duran also had a list of places when we were originally discussing this that she thought were abandoned places, if you remember.
Yeah, and I think we need to be careful if they're being abandoned because people just aren't doing it, or if it's difficult to get to.
The majority of these places are CDOT dumping it on the road, so. And
That
also
would
the
sort of come
32nd
out
Avenue
within the
between
first year.
Parfait and Kipling, on the south side of the road, where it's Lakewood. Lakewood runs a truck right up it and dumps it back in the street. But so you can see clearly where Wadsworth, Wheat Ridge, and Lakewood begin and end there.
We'll go after Lakewood. We'll give them a ticket. Patrick and I were talking that probably some of those abandoned places might show up after the first year.
Yes.
Well, I think I had Mr. Urban first.
Yeah, I guess I'd be more in favor of starting this with looking at what we can do for the business community and the commercial districts first and seeing how that would work out, and then moving it into the residential districts and seeing how we could implement it in that way. Moving it directly into the residential districts and knowing the makeup of our communities, I fear for situations where we have elderly residents fearing for some kind of citation, trying to remove snow, and then coming into some sort of situation where they're putting themselves at risk. And I want to try to avoid that, and we need to either come up with some sort of public outreach campaign or some way to inform them that there's going to be several warnings or some method to say that a lack of snow removal by a resident who is otherwise incapable, or there's some other method for them to call or outreach, or some way for them to get help in doing this when they're not otherwise able to do so. I understand each homeowner has the responsibility and the obligation to take care of their own property, but we do have, as we just heard from the economist, a significant number of elderly homeowners, and as we begin to overlay this snow removal policy, that's going to place a significant burden on that population, and we just need to be cognizant of that. And I'm not sure exactly how to implement that, but I just see that as a obstacle as we go forward, and we need to be cognizant of that.
Zach, are you suggesting that we start with the businesses and then we move on to the residential?
Correct.
Ms. Wooden?
I would agree that maybe the first year we would suspend any fines and that everybody would get, would that be called a citation or a warning? I don't know. And I say that because we did have a speaker in the beginning that said, you know, there's only 2 cities in the Denver metro area that don't have a snow removal. And I've always thought for years it was a little unusual that we don't have one. And I'd rather say we have a snow removal policy. This is my suggestion. We have a snow removal policy. We'll set the guidelines for business. We'll set the guidelines for the residences and for the homeowners. And I would be very much in favor of moving forward with this for both residences and businesses, and that maybe the first year say, well, there'll be warnings, but there won't be a fine. You know, give everybody a year to get used to it.
Reasonable approach. I see some nodding heads. Mr. Matthews?
I have one kind of devil's advocate style question here a little bit. How is this ordinance going to apply to the city? Or are we going to exempt ourselves, as so many politicians and government organizations do? They say the citizens have to follow the law, but we don't. And I'm thinking, how do we not exempt ourselves? Or should we?
Is there some areas you're...
Well, for instance, let's just for instance say out here along Wadsworth, and also the side streets. If we have sidewalk around there that fronts our property, do we go out now and?
We do, yeah, we do. Yeah, there might be a few areas that we haven't hit as quickly as possible, but we do. Yeah.
Scott addressed that new sidewalk up by the park there at Kipling, going up the hill. The parks already does that, but I'm.
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest we exempt us or the city from anything.
The same standard as we hold our citizens.
Yeah.
We would look pretty poor if we did that, wouldn't we? All right, have we got a consensus? Or, I don't know if we need, we just... Oh, you want to add something? Sure.
Yes. Okay. Now, you mentioned a lot of public education, so that would be community outreach, running this on Channel 8, all of us just kind of touching base on every level. And I would be in support of passing the ordinance if we're going to go for a year with our residential, letting them know that, this is implemented, but we're giving you a year to get accustomed.
Before we do fines.
Any kind of citations, and just do as much community outreach as we can.
But you're exempting businesses from that.
Yes.
Exempting businesses, they too do not get citation, is that what you're saying?
No, they would.
They would get citation, but not residents, much like what Genevieve had suggested. Okay, great.
Yeah, we'll see what kind of winter we have this year. If we have a mild winter, it'll go fine. It'll go swimmingly.
Just ready.
Tough, brutal winter, we'll see.
It's supposed to be a big one. Do we need a consensus on that, or we pretty much got that?
So the consensus is, what I've heard is to bring back an ordinance. What, did you want to read a consensus, or do you want me to go? This is what I heard, to bring back an ordinance. Well, there was all kinds of different things in here. Let me see. Just bring back an ordinance that's going to impact both businesses and residents. The first year, there'll be heavy community education, outreach, marketing, and then we'll add a section about depth of snow on when it triggers. I don't know if we had a consensus on the time frame though. And
We did 24 hours after the snow. I think it's.
well, that's what's in there, but there was some discussion about it. Fees. We'll look at the fee structure, see what the fees look like. And then what? I'm sorry, Janice.
Edit item D.
Oh, and edit item D. So that's either taken out or changed, reworded heavily.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Abandoned.
The abandoned, and then bring back a list of abandoned with the cost to do those.
And can we make the snowfall 3 inches?
Do you want to do that? 3 inches? Start with that.
I just caution 3 inches with some of the urban development that we're doing that's right on sidewalks. Because 3 inches is, I mean, that's quite a bit. And you know, you think about right now, I mean, even you look at the new, like the Chase Bank, I mean, they're south facing, but then you look at some of the places on Depew, you look at the new retirement apartments, 3 inches in those areas is quite a bit of snow with no sun on those areas. So I would just caution 3 inches. That just seems like a lot in some areas. I mean, on my sidewalk, it doesn't because it's south facing, but on north facing sidewalks, 3 inches can stick around for a while.
Especially a heavy snow. Dan, any other thoughts on that? Are you all?
I think 3 inches is a good compromise. I mean, you can still kind of walk through it. So I think that's a good.
Comfortable with 3 inches? You're not? Where are you? You like 3 inches?
I think the idea is that you're talking about the removal of snow, and anything under 3 inches, it's difficult to get to a situation where you're removing it. And yes, in a shaded area, that might be the case, but in most areas, that may not be the case.
Well, and I think the other thing is you can walk through it, but you can't possibly, if you're in a wheelchair or if you're, you know, in a stroller and those types of things.
Would you like us to look at maybe what?
Yeah, what other
Yeah,
cities do.
we can
research that further.
Yeah, we'll bring that back.
More difficult to suggest someone has to remove 3 inches or less of snow because there isn't much to remove. So there isn't much left to remove by the time you get around to it. So
We'll look at what other cities do and bring it back, and you guys can make a decision on first or second reading. No, you don't. I can pull it up. Somebody shut this off, unfortunately.
I'll go ahead and start while we're waiting for the PowerPoint. This is an informational update on the Education Alliance, the Wheat Ridge Education Alliance. And I thought I'd go over what we've done the last few years and what we're looking at in the future. And this is just informational for everyone. The Education Alliance, we started talking about it in probably the spring of 2014. And Patrick had a goal previously of wanting to get the schools more I don't know, what would you say, Patrick, more focus in the city with our schools, more connection with the schools. And I had talked with Jill Fellman, who was the school board member in this area, and she mentioned that there was a group in Arvada that met with the schools in the city and that they met on a quarterly basis. So this group was somewhat based off of what I had my talk with Jill Fellman about and how that group worked. So we got together a group of people and we started talking about how we can work closer with our local schools and form some better partnerships. And in the spring of 2015, it became somewhat apparent that we needed to set up somewhat of a formal structure. So we did set up a formal structure. We have a board of directors of about 8 to 10 people. And then we have school representatives, one representative from each of our schools that we work with. Originally, there were 17 schools that we were working with that were either private or public or charter schools in the Wheat Ridge area. A couple schools have indicated they just haven't interacted with us, so they may not want to be participating. If in the future they want to participate, that's fine, but at this time we're working with 15 schools. And this is the directory that we originally did. This was for the 14-15 school year. We did an update insert for last year, and then this is the new update insert for the 16-17 school year. So the primary purpose and mission of the Education Alliance is to facilitate the creation and maintenance of relationships between and among the parents, schools, local business community, and the city of Wheat Ridge, with the goal of informing citizens about the community schools and fostering programs that involve those parties for the advancement of academic excellence. The organization shall be nonpartisan and non-political. In no event shall the organization take any position on or advocate for or against any school district policy or change. So we're a lot about educating our citizens about the schools, creating partnerships, meeting people that are in the school district that can help the city, and that how the city can interact with the schools in a better way. And the board of directors is the city manager or mayor. We sometimes have both attend, a member of city council, member of police department. Oftentimes the police chief is there. Parks and Rec, Joyce Manwaring comes to our meetings. Member of the school board, right now it's Allie LaSalle who represents this area. We have school district representatives. They're like area directors that come and they represent both the elementary and then the secondary schools. We have 2 Wheat Ridge principals, and I have not been able to find a Wheat Ridge business yet, but I'm still working on it. We'll have a Wheat Ridge business representative. So we have the board of directors that meets on a monthly basis, and we have school, no here. And we have school representatives from each of the schools. Sometimes it's a parent, sometimes it's a principal, it just depends. And last year we met about 3 or 4 times. If that group wants to meet more, we certainly can. But we wanted to go over some of the things that we have. Is it ready? Oh, you didn't get it? Okay. That we've been going over. And I have a monthly, or actually a weekly conference call with the Stasco agency, and that is our PR firm for the city. And we go over what's happening in the schools and possibly what stories or what education we could do through the local media about our schools. And that's what this presentation's about when we get it up. Some of the things coming up for next year that are really exciting at Wheat Ridge High School, as you know, they had worked on their STEM program. And the first year they had 1 car that they went to Detroit with for the Eco Marathon. Last year they had 2 cars, and I just heard this weekend they're probably going to have 5 projects going forward, and the attendance in that class has risen dramatically. So that program has expanded dramatically, and we've helped promote it. We hope families are learning about it through some of the articles and through some of the information that we're getting out there. Also, somewhat through the science and the technology and STEM at the high school. I heard they are going to be having a uplink to the International Space Station, so they'll have a phone call to the International Space Station. The students will be on the NASA TV, able to talk and ask questions of the space station. Everett Middle School is turning 50 years old this year, so there'll probably be some things going on about that. And then the other thing at the high school is through the Shades of Blue program, which works on aviation, getting kids interested in aviation careers. There looks like through a grant program, they might be getting a simulator at the school, like a flight simulator, which would be great and probably working on getting more kids interested in that technology.
Finally, got it.
Do you have the clicker?
It's a PDF, so I'll have to scroll through it.
Oh, okay. I'll just talk. Okay, so the first thing that happened in the spring of 2015 was an article in the Gazette that talked about the restructure of the group. And then in the fall of last year, many of you will remember the Freddie Steinmark movie that came out, and then the high school did a lot of promotion as part of that. And so this is part of what we got out into the community. Not all of this was from the city and from the Stasco Agency and the Education Alliance, but they were part of a lot of these stories. So there was a book signing, there was the movie premiere, there were numerous articles, and there was also on local television stations, they came out and they were here for the street dedication, and they also did their own stories about Freddie Steinmark. So the Pink Showdown is the football game that was dedicated to cancer awareness. Freddie Steinmark had died from cancer, so that's how the cancer awareness. We partnered with Lutheran Hospital, which is, of course, our largest employer in Wheat Ridge, so that was a great partnership there. There's the street sign that we dedicated at the high schools, now called Freddie Steinmark Way. All of those news agencies picked up the stories and ran with them. So we got a lot of great Wheat Ridge promotion out of that story. Those are all the different stories that were there. Another thing we did last year is we wanted to highlight Pennington Elementary. Pennington Elementary has a unique extended day program. Those kids are in school for 8.5 hours, and they have extra learning and extra special programs that they get to participate in. And we contacted the Denver Post. Denver Post came out and did a story on this extended learning day. It's one of a few in the nation. It was an experimental project, and they're still collecting data on how this is affecting children and communities. So that was the story. Ron Slinger, who is at Red Rocks Community College, he happened to read that story, and he contacted the president of Red Rocks Community College and said, hey, let's partner with a local school, go over there, give them a ice cream social to thank them for all the hard work that they're doing within their program. And then Red Rocks Community College decided to give a student over at Pennington a full ride scholarship. So a kid at Pennington won a full ride scholarship to Red Rocks Community College, and it was a direct result from the story that we had produced. So that was another really great thing that happened last year. We also did some information about Sobeski Academy coming to Wheat Ridge. They took over the old Stevens building. That building was retrofitted to accommodate the Sobeski students after the Stevens Elementary moved into the old Wheat Ridge 5-8 building. So that was that story. Denver Post also picked up that story on that one. We were also part of promoting the STEM and the STEAM Gala, which was the cars again and the students going to the Eco Marathon with that. The district picked up some stories, and they had stories about that. And then most recently with the Carnation Festival, this was actually a really good example of how the community and all these different partners can get together to help promote our schools. There was an idea and a request from the Carnation Festival about how can we more integrate our schools into the Carnation Festival. And an idea came out as to let's give each school a picnic table, the schools decorate and paint the tables, and then we'll auction them off at the Carnation Festival. And then at the high school, they are working on projects to work with students who may not be college-bound, who are looking at the trades and training kids that want to go into the trades a little bit more. So the Colorado Construction Institute came out, and they helped teach our high school students on how to make these tables. And Jordan's Lumber out on Ward Road, so we did have a Wheat Ridge business that they graciously donated all the wood for 15 picnic tables. That wood was delivered to the high school. Then Colorado Construction Institute and Wheat Ridge High School teachers built these tables. The tables were then delivered to all 15 schools, and then the schools painted them. And if you were at the Carnation Festival this weekend, you saw that the tables were auctioned off. We made about $1,650 for the local schools. The opening bid on the tables was $50. The highest bid was $500, so certain schools got more than others, but $1,650 went back to the art department at each of the 15 schools. And then the other thing that we promoted through media was the STEAM program. They did this wonderful sculpture, and it was installed over at Lutheran Hospital, and it was the weekend of the run, Leaves of Hope. It was dedicated that weekend, rooted in hope. We also did 2 school videos. These are short, top-of-the-hour videos. One was about Everett Middle School and the specials programs going on over there, as they are right now the only public middle school in Wheat Ridge. We wanted to highlight Everett Middle School. And then the other school that we highlighted this year was Vivian Elementary. They have a special program in the district to help children that are hard of hearing and deaf. And so the school has a sign language club, and every spring they put on a really delightful musical. And this year it was not Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but Mary Poppins. So the kids do the whole musical signing, and this was a video about that. So if you want to look up YouTube, both of those videos are on there. They're about 2 to 3 minute videos. These are all the news releases that we put out. And this is some of the things we've been doing as to how to let our residents know what's going on in Wheat Ridge schools, how to get them in the door, how to make sure that our residents know, and if they want to support, they can support our local schools. So I don't know if anybody has any questions or ideas. We're open to ideas. The one thing we want to do going forward is this particular directory is 3 years old. We want to produce a new one. And was it about 2,000, 2,500?
I think so, yeah.
2,500. We may need some money in the budget going forward to do an updated directory, because we've had different changes in our schools, and we have a map. And these directories are given out on the Welcome to Wheat Ridge tours. We give them out to realtors. We give them out to any resident that wants one. These are really great for preschool families that want information on the local schools, or anybody that wants one can have one. Going forward, we're looking at making a updated version, and a student at the high school is helping us design the graphics for this. So if anyone has ideas on how to involve the schools, or how we can partner with residents and schools and keep creating these partnerships that are going to have stronger schools for our city, and make sure that our residents know what's going on in our schools at this moment in time, and all the new great programs that are happening.
Genevieve,
And that's
thank you.
it.
Thank you very much. You've really done a fabulous job. When she first came on council, I said to her, "What is it you want to do?" And she says, "I want to work with the schools." And boy, I guess she sort of has done that pretty much, huh? Very, very dedicated. Lots of great things that come out, which kind of knits our community together. Schools are such a basic element, so this has really been great for our community. Yes?
I have a question, and maybe it's better reserved for Mr. Dahl, but this committee is funded by the city, correct?
There's really not funding.
There's no funding at
There's
this
no
point.
funding.
Yeah.
Well, but
Yeah, the things we did, there's no budget for it, but we found money to do this, and a lot of it was,
the top of the hour things?
yeah, it's all done in-house.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, here's my question. I have twice in the past, it hasn't been recently, I kind of forgot about it. I've gotten, not an official FOIA request, but a request for agendas and minutes of the meetings, and I don't have them. I don't even know when the committee meets. And so, since you're talking about it tonight, I just thought it would be something. Have you ever had requests for agendas and minutes? And do you have minutes? And if you do, if I ever get a request, can I get them?
Absolutely. Any meeting is open to the public. So if the public wants to come to our board meetings, I guess I can email you and let you know when they're usually the first Monday of every month, and then if there's a holiday, it's moved to Tuesday, or if there's, like this summer, we actually skipped a month. So I can let you know when those meetings are, but they'd be open to the public. And the school representative meetings, actually, if we had more public there, that would be great, because we'd like to hear from a lot of people as to what we're doing. But I'll get you the minutes or the agendas, and everything is open to the public. And as far as our structure, we're doing no fundraising at all. So it's not a 501c3 where they're doing fundraising and then they give money to different things. There's no fundraising at all. And in fact, on the picnic tables that recently happened, all the checks went directly to the school. So all the checks are written directly to the school.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Ms. Davis.
I just have a question. I actually, I need to pay my dues, but I guess they're probably just starting. Belong to the PTA in Wilmore Davis. And I know a lot of those organizations struggle. Is there any discussions around how to help some of those groups? Because I mean, they ultimately do help the schools too, because they raise money, and I know we raised money and bought some equipment and stuff. Is there any discussions around that, supporting the PTAs more, or if there are struggling PTAs, getting them help if they need it?
And by support, do you mean financial support?
Well, even not only financial support, because I know at Wilmore Davis, parents are busy.
Mm-hmm.
Do people actually know? I mean, I don't have children, but I still go as a member of the community.
Mm-hmm.
Just some outreach and some awareness, education, just to help some of the PTAs. I just didn't.
Definitely, we can help the PTAs, and we do work closely with all the principals of all the schools. So as far as the financial aspect, there's a Golden Schools Foundation, and they are primarily fundraising. However, for this particular group at this particular time, I don't believe that we're anywhere near doing any kind of fundraising. But I know other communities do that. So in the future, if this group decides to do that could be an aspect. But at this point in time, the Alliance has no funds, and we spend no funds, and yeah.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily even mean funds, but even bring all the PTA presidents together like you do principals, and hey, what do you do that works well? Hey, what do you do? How do you get families involved, because everyone's spread so thin? How do you get community involved? I mean, even just networking type of support.
Phone's not on. Okay. Nothing else? Any other reports? You said housing authority's out of money. Anything? We need to talk about places for you guys. Mr. Urban, CML.
I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who came out to the Carnation Festival this last weekend and supported the Wheat Ridge High School Spirit teams on their dunk tank. And also just thanks to everybody who came out and supported the Carnation Festival this weekend. It was extremely busy and exciting, and there was a lot of new stuff. And the parade was awesome. And so just thanks to our community for supporting that longtime tradition.
Mr. M. I want to thank the council for supporting it as well. There was, all of you that could made it. Thank you very much for that. It's a great way to be out with our community. I believe that's the end of it.